Lord of Mystery. The Undead Don't Die from Passing Fire by author Ni Di Xun Zong chapter 336-350. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. Chapter 336 Everything Has a Price. Forsaken Land of the Gods, Afternoon Town Camp. Led by Chief Colin Iliad, the exploration team of 9, including Derek Berg, left the afternoon town camp and ascended towards the peak along the stone steps paved with gray stones, between towering and dark buildings. They were at least sequence 6 Beyonders, and most of them belonged to the warrior pathway. They advanced quite quickly. After clearing several waves of monsters, mainly rotten giants, they finally reached the area shrouded in twilight, and were shocked by the magnificent and huge buildings with a strong sense of epic. For a short time, no one spoke. This was also the first time they had encountered a place with natural light, without alternating lightning. However, after generations of changes, although they revered the sun, recorded in the literature, they had already become more adapted to the environment with frequent lightning and deep darkness. They had an instinctive fear of this situation solidified in twilight. Both hope and fear. After entering the area shrouded in twilight, the entire exploration team, including Chief Colin Iliad and Shepherd, Elder Lovia, inevitably showed signs of fatigue and decay, feeling as if they had entered the late years of their lives. As they advanced, more and more rotten giants, either wandering on the road or rushing out of different buildings, appeared and became stronger. With one side weakened and the other strengthened, the advance became difficult. After several fierce battles, the City of Silver exploration team finally broke through the blockade and interception of those monsters and arrived at an extremely quiet area, where there was no sound at all, making their scalps numb. In response, Silver Knight, Colin Iliad had to break the silence and reminded them. This means we have truly entered the Giant King's court, and are about to approach the core. The danger level will only rise, not fall. Upon hearing this, the hearts of the exploration team members couldn't help but tighten. The rotten giants who had just attacked them had strength comparable to Sequence 5. If they continued, wouldn't they encounter Sequence 4 monsters? If it were 1 or 2, it would be fine, but if they were still in groups like before, their situation would probably be quite dangerous. The chief clearly anticipated this situation and was also extremely vigilant about everything around him. However, unexpectedly, even though they were delving deeper into the core of the Giant King's court, they did not encounter a single monster along the way. Finally, a huge stone staircase appeared before them. Its overall color was grayish-white, but it was stained with an orange-yellow light, both brilliant and silent. Above the huge staircase was a magnificent city wall that one had to look up to see the top. There were many traces of damage and burning on it, and in some places, arrows as thick as ordinary trees and several meters long were stuck, causing some stones to collapse. In the middle of this city wall was a pair of double doors dozens of meters high. Its color was more grayish-blue, with golden nails embedded on it. And the most important thing was that this door had been opened at some point. This unexpected situation immediately made the others more vigilant, but Chief Colin Iliad resolutely stepped onto the stairs. It was clear that the chief was not surprised by the situation here. After all, he had personally seen those 2 foreigners enter the Giant King's court. As the exploration team approached, the scene behind the door gradually came into their view. A grayish-white, orange-red light-covered, countless tiered staircase extended upwards from behind the door, all the way to the highest and most magnificent Giant King's residence. There were no other obstacles along the way, and palaces and high towers were densely distributed on both sides. On both sides of the Divine Kingdom stairs were a large number of bases used to place statues. From the size of the bases, it could be judged that the statues placed on them were at least 6 meters high. But now, the giant statues guarding the Divine Kingdom stairs were nowhere to be seen, leaving only the intact bases, and the scattered rubble on the steps that had not been cleaned. It was clear that this was the masterpiece of the previous visitor. The reason they were able to come here unimpeded was that the other party had already cleared the dangers in advance. Colin Iliad took a deep breath. If this was the case, then this exploration might be even smoother than he had imagined. Thinking this, Colin led the members of the exploration team to continue upwards, and a palace that rose into the clouds gradually became clear. And when they finally stepped into that magnificent palace, they saw a scene they would never forget. The palace was bathed in the solidified twilight, and on the left was a railing made of a row of stone pillars. Beyond the railing was a diffused orange-red cloud, and in the distance of the cloud was a gently surging, endless deep blue, a deep blue that made a rushing sound. Without anyone explaining, the members of the City of Silver exploration team simultaneously recalled the records in the books and Little Jack's description, and a noun flashed in their minds. Sea. The deep blue, gently surging, endless, seemingly containing infinite life, sea was presented before the eyes of the City of Silver exploration team members just like that, no longer a record in ancient texts, nor a combination of words from a foreigner. Although it was still far away, it seemed that there was already a possibility of reaching it. In the exploration team, the burgundy-haired Anshina gazed at it infatuatedly, opened her mouth, seemingly wanting to express something, but in the end, the only word she said was, "Sea. Is the sea beautiful?" A voice asked. Anshina still gazed infatuatedly at the boundless sea, and lightly, mm'd. "Yes, it's very beautiful." There was a hint of nostalgia in the voice, and he said in a low mood. "Thousands of years have passed, the Giant King's court is still magnificent, and that sea is still beautiful. Just standing here, you can take in the entire Giant King's court. But now, the person who was looking at the scenery has long since disappeared, and I have searched the entire Giant King's court, but I haven't found even one living giant. Everyone is dead, died in that great change thousands of years ago." This unexpected remark made the exploration team slightly stunned. This was clearly not a sigh that could be made by residents of the City of Silver. Although this palace was magnificent, they were not residents here, and there was nothing here worth their nostalgia. So who was this person with a nostalgic tone? Anshina suddenly turned around and looked vigilantly at the giant who had appeared at some point. He was clearly tall and extremely eye-catching, but none of them had noticed his arrival. If the other party had not spoken rashly just now, but had suddenly launched an attack. Fine cold sweat appeared on Anshina's forehead. She could already foresee her consequences. The gray-blue-skinned giant was indifferent to their vigilance, and just looked at the leading chief, and asked kindly. "I remember you are called Colin." The chief was silent for 2 seconds, and gently nodded. "Colin Iliad, we met at the afternoon town camp." Grossel smiled honestly, raised his hand to scratch the back of his head, and there was no ferocity or tyranny in his vertical single eye as depicted in various giant legends. Colin looked around, and as if inadvertently asked, "I remember, you were accompanied by a Mr. Ember, is he not here?" Giant Grossel looked around with his vertical single eye, and chuckled. "He is on the North Continent. You also hope to go to the North Continent from here, right?" Colin was silent and did not comment on this. Grossel saw the vigilance and hostility of the City of Silver exploration team, but he didn't take it to heart, just smiled and turned to leave. Anshina was a little hesitant and uncertain. "Chief, we follow him." Colin Iliad saw the vigilance and apprehension of the others, and said in a deep voice. Derek was silent, and was the first to follow. Just like that, the 9 members of the exploration team cautiously followed behind the tall gray-blue-skinned giant, and Giant Grossel could clearly sense their following, but he did not speak to stop them. In this situation, even the most hostile member of the exploration team could see that this giant named Grossel had no ill intentions. Finally, they passed through the hall and came to an open door. Following Grossel who entered, they saw an unusually magnificent and luxurious palace. At the end of the palace were steps covered with orange-red light, and on the steps was a huge iron-black throne. Thousands of years ago, Giant King Ormir sat on that huge throne, ruling the divine kingdom called the Giant King's Court. Standing at the entrance of this magnificent palace, the exploration team hesitated for a moment and looked at the gray-blue giant. For giants, their trespassing into the Giant King's residence should be a capital offense, right? Although the giant had no desire to attack them along the way, this did not mean that the other party was harmless. Once they rashly entered the palace, what awaited them was likely the other party's relentless pursuit. Grossel stood before the steps of the throne, suddenly turned back to look at the people at the door, scratched his head and asked, "Aren't you coming in?" The exploration team members subconsciously looked at Colin, and the chief hesitated slightly, then stepped into the palace. The anticipated attack did not come, and the giant was still standing in front of the throne waiting for them. This made the members of the exploration team put down their guard and follow the chief into the palace. And when everyone had caught up, Grossel went up the steps and walked to the iron-black throne. Then, the members of the exploration team saw that this tall giant, with an almost cautious posture, avoided the throne and went around to the back of the throne. Colin immediately said in a deep voice, "Do not approach the throne." The exploration team's hearts tightened. Entering the palace might not be offensive, but touching the throne definitely was. Colin took a deep breath and ascended the tall steps, surrounding the iron-black throne from a distance. Then he saw that behind the throne, there was a pair of double doors, gray-blue, dimly lit, depicting a twilight scene. This might be the door to the outside world. Colin, Iliad, Derek, and Levia simultaneously had this thought. That is the door to leave here. The voice of Giant Grossel confirmed their guess. Seeing the members of the exploration team look at him, Grossel chuckled. You can open that door yourselves. I'll do it. Derek volunteered and stepped forward without hesitation. Colin was silent for 2 seconds, and gently nodded at Derek. If the giant was not lying to them, then there was indeed a passage to leave behind this door. But if the giant had been lying to them all along, then there was likely unimaginable danger hidden behind this door. And the person who opened the door would definitely bear the most risk. As the strongest person in the exploration team, Colin could not open the door. Because once something unexpected happened to him, the remaining people would not be able to stop the giant's slaughter. So, only others could take the risk. And now, Derek took on this responsibility voluntarily. Derek took a deep breath, quickly stepped forward to the door, placed his hand on the door, and pushed this gray-blue door with force. Drops of water slid down Derek's face, and a heavy scraping sound echoed in his ears. A gap appeared, allowing golden sunlight to shine in. The gap grew wider and wider, and a sea shimmering with golden light gradually appeared in Derek's eyes, in Colin Iliad's eyes, and in the eyes of all members of the entire exploration team. Their eyes were full of hope, and their faces showed smiles without any gloom and a faint longing. The open gray-blue door, the stone steps leading downwards, the sea shimmering with golden light, and the ubiquitous light, that was the result they had ultimately pursued through countless explorations and countless sacrifices. Derek looked at Grossel with some anticipation and asked, "Can we leave from here?" "No." Grossel shook his head and explained. "You must leave at the right time and in the right way." Derek asked impatiently, "What is the right way?" Grossel retorted, "Why should I tell you?" Derek was stunned for a moment, and the nerves of the City of Silver people tightened instantly. Grossel's friendly actions along the way almost made them forget that this giant was also their potential enemy. Grossel's vertical single eye swept over the few people, and he slowly said, "Ancient Sun God killed our king, why do you think I would let his believers leave here?" This sentence immediately made the atmosphere between the two sides extremely tense, and Anshina and others had even put their hands on their respective weapons. That's right. The other party was a giant, and the lord they believed in had once killed giant King Ormir. This was definitely a life and death feud for the giants. What's more, the City of Silver was once a believer of the giant king, but eventually converted to the Lord's faith. For the giants, this was a blatant betrayal. The conflict between the two sides was almost irreconcilable. Colin reached out and stopped the people from the City of Silver, and asked in a deep voice. "So, what are your conditions?" He believed that the other party's friendliness before was not fake. If the other party really didn't want them to leave, there was no need to bring them here, and even less need to let them open that door. Chapter 337 Anchor. It's very simple. Grossel brought out the speech he had prepared earlier and said seriously. You just need to believe in other existences. At first glance, it seemed reasonable. The god the City of Silver believed in killed the King of Giants, so the giants couldn't let you leave. But if the City of Silver changed to a new belief, then the giants would have no reason to stop you. It sounded simple and was also simple to do. But these words carried completely different meanings when heard by different people. For ordinary believers, their faith in the gods was far from firm. It was reasonable to exchange their faith for a chance to survive. But for devout believers, they would consider this an insult to their faith and would inevitably fight with all their might. And which type did the City of Silver belong to? In the dark forsaken land of the gods, their faith had not changed for thousands of years. Such faith was absolutely devout. However, when the exploration team members heard the giant's condition, they did not show any excessive behavior. Instead, a glimmer of hope faintly reappeared in their eyes. If they could leave just by changing their faith, what was there not to agree to? Yes, the City of Silver did believe in the Lord, and it had not changed for thousands of years. But this was not because their faith was devout, but simply because they had no other choice. In the dark forsaken land of the gods, the only god they knew was the ancient sun god. But for thousands of years, the Lord they believed in had never saved them. If there was a new god who could save them, most people in the City of Silver would change their faith without hesitation, like Derek, and like Levia. For Derek, it was Mr. Fool who saved him in his most desperate moment, and it was Mr. Fool who brought him new hope. Therefore, he would only believe in Mr. Fool. As for Levia, the ancient sun god could not save the City of Silver, so she chose the true creator. She did not know if the true creator was truly an avatar of the ancient sun god, but at least the true creator occasionally responded to her prayers. This alone was countless times stronger than the ancient sun god. They were like this, and the other people in the City of Silver were naturally the same. even the chief was no exception. If Colin's faith was truly devout enough, how could he allow heretics like Derek and Lovia to exist? He tacitly allowed Derek and Lovia's belief in other existences, and also tacitly allowed some of their unconventional behaviors, because Colin pinned his hopes on the existence behind them being able to save the City of Silver. Under the tense and expectant gazes of the other members of the exploration team, Colin was silent for 2 seconds, then slowly asked, "What kind of existence?" The gray-blue-skinned giant stared at them with his vertical single eye and slowly said, "Fool." Derek almost couldn't hold back. Although he had already guessed in his heart, when Grossell personally said the word, "Fool," Derek couldn't help but be secretly shocked, as expected of Mr. Fool. Colin Iliad calmly turned his gaze to Derek. He knew about the Fool. Because his Sequence 3 advancement ritual required the blessing of a god. Of course, an angel could also achieve the same effect. But the City of Silver had no angels, and the god they believed in had never responded to their prayers. Therefore, he could only seek help from other gods. And the only ones in the City of Silver who had established contact with other gods were Derek and Lovia. Although he was skeptical of the gods they believed in, the true creator that Lovia believed in was clearly darker and more corrupted, and it brought a considerable threat to the City of Silver. As for the existence that Derek believed in, even the pathway given to Derek was the barred pathway, which represented light. With light and darkness placed before him at the same time, any normal person would tend to choose light. Colin was the same. He chose to pray to the Fool that Derek spoke of during the advancement ritual, and had even prepared himself for sacrifice for this. But that Fool did nothing. He simply gave a blessing and then disappeared. If not for this, Colin would not have dared to let another elder of the 6-member council, Waiter Silman, advance to Sequence 3 in the same way. The fact is, the moment he chose the Fool, he had already decided the belief of the City of Silver. But now, the giant named Grossell also believed in the Fool, and even told them without hesitation that only by believing in the Fool could they leave the forsaken land of the gods. This both surprised Colin, but also made him feel that everything seemed to be within reason. After all, he had seen Grossell in the afternoon town camp before, and from the subsequent probing of Derek and Lovia, he learned that Derek reacted to the names Grossell and Ember, which meant that he actually knew those two foreigners. Even if he tried his best to hide it, Derek was obviously not the kind of person who was good at acting. And Derek was born and grew up in the City of Silver. Even when he went out to explore, Colin personally watched over him the whole time. The only way he could have established contact with foreigners was through that Fool. And the reason they knew each other was obviously because both sides believed in that Fool. Numerous thoughts flashed through Colin Iliad's mind. He looked up at the gray-blue-skinned giant and said in a solemn tone, "We are followers of the Fool." Grossell was stunned for a moment and scratched his head with his hand. This completely threw him off. Shouldn't the script be that he tells them the honored name of Mr. Fool, and then they follow along and chant it? Colin saw Grossell's expression and knew he was suspicious, so he immediately chanted devoutly in the giant language. "The Fool who doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who holds good fortune." After chanting the Fool's honored name, Colin looked up at Grossell again and asked, "Can we leave now?" "Ah, can we?" Grossell scratched his head. "I don't know. Is there something wrong with this script? Is there something wrong with this script?" Above the gray fog, Mr. Fool Klein, who was seated at the head of the bronze long table, had a headache. Grossell was his follower, so he specifically asked Grossell to perform a prayer when the City of Silver exploration team entered the Giant King's court, and then used the corresponding crimson star in the sea god scepter to extend his vision to a certain distance around, thus watching the live broadcast. The only problem was that this method of observing, relying on prayer light spots could not be maintained for too long. This had nothing to do with his own spirituality. This connection would naturally fade and could only be maintained for at most 3/4 of an hour. Of course, in Klein's plan, 3/4 of an hour was actually completely sufficient. After all, Klein did not intend for Grossell and the City of Silver exploration team to have a conflict. He only needed to spread his honored name. And in the original plan, Grossell should have proposed the condition of, only by believing in the Fool can you leave, and then the people of the City of Silver would choose to compromise after a brief inner struggle, and then return to the City of Silver to promote the faith of the Fool. But he didn't expect the chief of the City of Silver to not follow the script and directly admit his belief in the Fool. This was completely beyond Klein's expectation, because the only thing he had done for this chief was to provide him with a certain blessing during his Sequence 3 advancement ritual last week, and nothing more. He never expected the other party to believe in him so easily, and even less did he expect him to so frankly admit his faith in front of the residents of the City of Silver who had always believed in the sun god. Klein could understand the City of Silver chief's eagerness to leave the forsaken land of the gods, but his actions still effectively disrupted Klein's plan. And the reason Klein did this was not because he intentionally made things difficult for the City of Silver, but mainly because he had no other choice. He needed to use the miracle of the City of Silver leaving the forsaken land of the gods to become a Sequence 2 angel. In other words, he needed enough anchors. In fact, no matter which Beander pathway, the higher the sequence, the more serious the tendency towards madness and inhumanity. This would gradually surpass one's own humanity and must rely on external anchors to maintain sufficient balance. Normally, at Sequence 4 and Sequence 3, this situation was not so obvious. But at the angel level, even with enough anchors to fix it, one would occasionally fall into dark, negative, and mutated states, and must endure and resist alone, waiting for it to subside. This is like a sacred and solemn existence. Normally, there seems to be no problem. He can respond to your prayers, chat with you normally, and even crack a few jokes. But at certain times, he can only hide in a dark room, concealed in the shadows, tear off his outer skin, reveal a sinister side, and show various signs of madness. At Sequence 3, one is already a god in a sense and can respond to prayers within a certain range, so a certain amount of anchors are needed. But because it is not yet at the angel level, the anchors are not necessarily believers and can be replaced by other things, such as the vivid imprints with mystical significance in life. And Klein did just that. The reason his mental state is still good and he doesn't have multiple personalities or become uncontrollably cold and terrifying is because the imprint of the scholar of yore in history is his anchor point. But what Sequence 3 can do does not mean that a Sequence 2 angel can do the same. Sequence 2 angels cannot take shortcuts. Their anchor points must be a sufficient number of believers. This is why gods need to proselytize. Believers are the anchors of gods. A believer is an anchor point. In this regard, there is essentially no difference between a noble and a commoner. No one is more noble, no one is more lowly. In terms of quantity, the believers of the 7 Orthodox gods' churches number in the tens of millions. And even if we only look at the evil god believed in by those secret organizations, their believers are at least in the tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands. And to ensure that he would not lose control during the process of advancing to Sequence 2, Klein had to have enough anchors before advancing. But he couldn't proselytize extensively in the North Continent. Firstly, he didn't have the ability, and secondly, he didn't have the time. The people of the North Continent know that they should not believe in evil gods casually, especially those evil gods that have emerged from who knows where. To openly develop believers in the North Continent would definitely take a lot of time and effort, and this requires organized and planned dissemination of faith. But Klein lacked the necessary conditions. He was only one person and could not proselytize on a large scale. Of course, he could also mobilize other members of the Tarot Club to help proselytize, but this would be putting the cart before the horse. Not only would this not necessarily have much effect, but it would also inevitably expose the fact that Miss Justice and the others believed in the fool, making it difficult for them to stand their ground in their original churches and beliefs. Of course, Klein could also choose another path, that is, to give up using believers as anchor points and use the first fire as anchor points. Grossell did this, so even if he didn't have a single believer, he could still successfully advance to a Sequence 2 angel. But this path is also not feasible. Grossell can do this because his limit is Sequence 2, and Ember doesn't expect him to become a god. So he was given the greatest possible convenience. But Klein is different. He is destined to ascend the throne of Sequence 0, a man destined to become a god. And to become a god, none of the steps in the traditional sense can be omitted. And among these, using believers as anchor points is undoubtedly crucial. And the current problem is whether Klein has enough anchor points. Are my current anchors enough? Klein murmured in a low voice, feeling a little uncertain. Theoretically, he actually had quite a few anchors. The members of the Tarot Club could all be considered his believers. Although the number was a bit small, and most of them were not fanatical believers, they were at least moderately devout. In addition to this, he had 3 main sources of believers. The first part were those scattered ignorant youths. This part of the believers originated from the Aurora Order's behavior of spreading the Fool's honored name back then. The Aurora Order's original intention was to find the Fool's believers through this, but it backfired. The widespread dissemination of the Fool's honored name led many ignorant youths who pursued novelty to choose to pray to the Fool. Of course, Klein had never responded to their prayers, so this part of the people could only be considered shallow believers, and it was hard to say how much effect they would have. The second part were the believers off See God, Cavatua, which was the largest part in number. These believers had always believed in the so-called sea god, but Thesia god was now Klein's alias. So these people were also considered Klein's believers, and to some extent, they could also be considered the fool's believers. And the third part came from the Abraham family. Mr. Dorr personally came forward and mobilized the entire Abraham family to believe in the fool. His appeal was undeniably strong. So although the time was short, the faith of the Abraham family members in the fool was extremely devout. Although they still couldn't be called fanatical believers, there were quite a few devout believers among them. These three parts of believers added up to at least tens of thousands of people. But Klein still felt a little insecure, otherwise he wouldn't need to develop the City of Silver into his own believers. Therefore, when Colin made the request, Klein felt a little conflicted instead. Chapter 338 It's broken, I became a substitute. Above the gray fog, Klein murmured in a low voice. Are my anchors sufficient? To become an angel, the potion, the ritual, and enough anchors are all indispensable. Klein wasn't worried about the first two, the only question was whether his anchors were enough. Theoretically, his anchors were sufficient. Even if these anchors weren't numerous or stable enough, Klein was only promoting to sequence 2, not becoming a god. Ultimately, the reason he hesitated was, at root, fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the future, fear of gain and loss. No matter who it was, once they became an angel, they would inevitably be affected by the Beander characteristic, becoming increasingly cold, cruel, and indifferent to life. Sufficient anchors were necessary to maintain their humanity. This wasn't something that could be avoided by fully digesting the potion in the previous stages and mastering the acting method. Even Rosal the Great, who had progressed so smoothly in the earlier stages, nearly mutated and approached losing control at the sequence 2 angel level. As for the angels Klein knew, they seemed relatively normal on the surface, but what they were actually like, and what state they were in when hiding behind the scenes, he had no way of knowing. But what was certain was that every angel would be more or less influenced by the primordial one. If one could obtain a long lifespan at the sequence 4 and sequence 3 stages, then a saint indeed wouldn't have much motivation to promote to angel. After all, the higher the sequence, the closer one was to the primordial one. This was also why, Demoness of White, Katerina, who was already a demigod during the Four Emperors' War, had only risen from sequence 4 to sequence 3 over 1,000 years, because she feared the negative effects of becoming an angel. The sequence 3 of the Demoness pathway is, Demoness of Undying, possessing a much longer lifespan than sequence 3s of other pathways, which is why she had enough confidence to forego promoting to sequence 2. But I have no choice, no retreat either. After a brief silence, Klein sighed soundlessly. Klein knew that if he didn't want to promote, Ember wouldn't force him. On the contrary, Ember would even help him sever his special connection with Sphera Castle, allowing him to be a free and unfettered demigod, unbound by anything. As for the position of fool, Ember could entirely find someone else to replace him, such as Mr. Dorr. Mr. Dorr, who had already fallen to sequence 2, calmly accepted reality and was content with everything now. At least he was still alive, and at least he had escaped the control of the outer gods and could live freely. But if Ember gave him an opportunity to become the fool, Mr. Dorr would certainly not refuse. And as long as someone else took his place, Klein wouldn't have to bear any of this. He could just be Mr. World, no longer needing to pretend to be the fool. But Klein knew even more clearly that it wasn't Ember forcing him, but the celestial worthy forcing him, and he himself was forcing himself. He was different from everyone else, others had choices, but Klein's life was planned out. Therefore, he would inevitably walk the seer pathway and would inevitably continue to raise his sequence amidst various pressing crises. Eventually, he would become a perfect substitute for the celestial worthy to use for resurrection. The higher his sequence, the tighter his connection with Sphera Castle, the higher the possibility of the celestial worthy's revival, and the more dangerous his situation. But as Lu Xuan said, the effect of force is mutual. The higher his sequence, the more confidence he would have to resist the celestial worthy. More importantly, he himself was unwilling to give up. Having come this far, giving up like this, Klein himself wouldn't be reconciled. After all, since I'm already here, Klein laughed at himself. His mood, however, lightened considerably. Perhaps it was because he had made up his mind, or perhaps he had let go of his hang-ups. But no matter what, he was already prepared. Klein took a deep breath, extended his right hand, and spread his spirituality, touching the crimson star that symbolized Grosel. Giant King's Court, within the Giant King's residence. Grosel, who was hesitating, suddenly saw a blur before his eyes, and a crimson tide surged out of the void, instantly engulfing him. He saw a boundless white mist, a magnificent and imposing palace, and an ancient, mottled bronze long table. And at the head of that long table, a figure shrouded in dense gray mist looked down at him. That was the Fool's oracle. Grossel came back to his senses, looked at the crowd waiting for an answer, and said, "You can go." Colin immediately understood, because only he had chanted the Fool's honorific name, so only he could go. Colin ordered in a deep voice, "Derek, pray to the Fool." Upon hearing this, Derek immediately and devoutly chanted in giant language, "The Fool who doesn't belong to this era." Seeing this, the other exploration team members immediately scrambled to imitate Derek, chanting the Fool's honorific name somewhat awkwardly. The Fool who doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who holds good fortune. Although they all knew this was just a reconnaissance trip, and if everything went smoothly, they would return and bring the rest of the City of Silver. But no one was willing to miss this opportunity, they were already impatient to see what the outside world was like. Colin did not stop them, but instead looked at Luvia beside him. He knew that she believed in the true creator, and he could also guess that the relationship between the true creator and the Fool was not very harmonious, so he did not intend to force her to change her belief, even if it was just a simple chanting of another existence's honorific name. Colin thought for a moment, just about to tell her not to force herself and that she could wait for them here. But before he could speak, this elder, dressed in a purple-patterned black robe and with a beautiful and generous appearance, began to chant with extraordinary piety. "The Fool who doesn't belong to this era." Colin remained silent, the words of persuasion unspoken. "Can we go now?" Derek, who had finished chanting the Fool's honorific name, asked seriously. Grossel scratched his head and said in a muffled voice, "Probably. Mr. Fool didn't say no, so not saying no means yes. You'll have to wait a while." The more Grossel thought about it, the more confident he became, and he lowered his voice to instruct. "You can only go at night." "Why at night?" The people of the City of Silver were filled with bewilderment. Having lived in the forsaken land of the gods, they had an instinctive fear of the night. And outside the opened gray-blue door, the sea shimmering with golden light and the omnipresent light deeply shocked their souls, making them subconsciously hold their breath, unwilling to give up such a beautiful sight. "Chief." The people of the City of Silver subconsciously looked at Colin. "Wait." Colin ordered in a deep voice, and the people of the City of Silver said no more, just concentrating on admiring the beautiful scenery. After an unknown amount of time, the sea shimmering with golden light was suddenly enveloped in darkness. In the depths of the darkness, a faint mist could be vaguely seen. Within the mist, there was a black church with a pointed spire and various other buildings, giving a feeling of being both real and illusory. Derek and the others looked at the town in the mist and the shadowy figures of pedestrians with confusion, unable to understand what was happening. This was not the darkness they were familiar with. Just then, Grossel glanced at Derek, who was naturally emitting a pure radiance, and instructed, "Come with me." Without waiting for others to respond, the giant stepped forward first, passed through the great door, and walked step by step down the stone stairs outside, delving into the darkness. "Keep up," Colin ordered, leading the somewhat fearful people of the City of Silver into the darkness. In the dense darkness, they finished walking down the stairs, and their eyes suddenly brightened, seeing an orange-red light and a cluster of monastery-style black buildings. Unbeknownst to them, they had walked to the opposite side of the giant king's court, separated from their original location by a sea of clouds stained orange-red. The giant Grossel said in a muffled voice, "You still need to wait here for a while. You can find places to rest. It's best not to leave the church, otherwise it's easy to get lost in the depths of the dream." Dream. The people of the City of Silver felt it was somewhat unbelievable. They had clearly been in reality just now, so why did they suddenly appear in a dream? The members of the exploration team were full of questions, but they didn't ask any more and didn't rest, still standing in place, patiently waiting. Time passed by minute, and dazzling rays of sunlight suddenly shone into this world, making everything turn brilliant white, then fade and disappear. They saw that golden sea once again and felt the terrifying aura that made them dare not look directly at it. However, unlike before, they were now on an island, with clumps of huge, golden, strange plants with smiling faces behind them. The state of these plants, without any sense of degradation or distortion, made every member of the exploration team genuinely experience the joy brought by life. "We really came out. It's really a different world." Anatir and the others couldn't help but exclaim with joy in their hearts. "Praise the Fool." A sudden impulse welled up in Derek's heart, and he immediately knelt down on the ground, kissing the earth beneath his feet, tears streaming down his face. Colin was silent for a moment upon seeing this scene, and then he heard the joyful and choked voices of the people of the City of Silver. Praise the fool! Praise the fool! Lovia, who believed in the true creator, said in a low voice. Colin was silent for a moment, then also softly chanted the fool's honorific name. Praise the fool! Just then, Colin's vision suddenly blurred, and a figure appeared in his sight at some point. It was a middle-aged man with a stern face, void black hair mixed with a little white, and a pair of azure eyes like rippling layers. The middle-aged man had a gentle smile on his face and introduced himself in a kind tone. I am the attendant beside Mr. Fool, the guardian angel Bethel. I walk here on behalf of the Fool, to welcome the arrival of everyone from the City of Silver. Praise the Fool! Derek chanted devoutly and said respectfully, Thank you for your help, Your Highness Bethel. He had learned about some of the customs of the beliefs on the North Continent. In major churches, if a demigod of angel rank walks on the ground, they should be addressed with the suffix, Your Highness, when spoken to directly, as a sign of respect. Similarly, for representatives of the deities such as popes and patriarchs, Your Eminence, should be added. Additionally, for the head of a church, Holy Father, or Holy See, can be used as alternative titles. Bethel Abraham smiled and nodded, accepting his thanks, then looked at the tall giant beside him and said, Twilight Angel, I'll take it from here. Huh. Grossell scratched his head, and then realized that Twilight Angel was referring to him. Although he didn't recognize the other party, since they were both angels under the Fool, there shouldn't be any problem. Moreover, didn't the Fool not say anything? Thinking this, Grossell nodded towards Bethel and the people of the City of Silver, his figure disappearing into the sunlight. Twilight Angel. The people of the City of Silver still had a dreamlike feeling. That giant who seemed a bit simple and honest was actually an angel. Guardian Angel, Twilight Angel. Above the gray fog, Klein resisted the urge to cover his face, feeling both amused and helpless. Can you not add so much drama to yourself? Mr. Dor's personality is really a bit unexpected. Could it be that he learned badly from Rosal the Great? However, Mr. Dor is now indeed his angel, so it would be unreasonable not to have a title. And he also had to thank the other party for choosing the title, Guardian Angel, instead of Door Angel, Gatekeeper Angel, or Knocking Angel. As for Grossell's Twilight Angel, it sounded quite good and imposing. And if calculated this way, the Fool actually has quite a few angels under him. Guardian Angel, Bethel, Twilight Angel, Grossell, Death Angel, Mr. Azik, Mercury Angel, Will Ossepton, Headless Angel, Rynette. I can't stand it anymore. Klein covered his face. There were many of these angels, but most of them probably didn't even know they were the Fool's angels, let alone that the Fool wasn't even an angel. Klein sighed and waved his hand, summoning a few items from the pile of miscellaneous items. The Miracle Invoker, Beander characteristic stripped from either half of the Fool, or Zeratul, the Worm of Star provided by the Abraham family, the Worm of Time provided by the old gentleman of the poet classmate, and the blood obtained from half of the Fool, a full 300 milliliters. Except for the Miracle Invoker Beander characteristic, the others were just auxiliary materials. With the materials prepared, he conjured an iron pot, threw the 300 milliliters of Ouroboros's blood into it, and then, in order, put in the Worm of Time, and the Worm of Star, shining with brilliant light. The deep black and reddish liquid in the iron pot then became dark, its surface transparent and clear, with hidden whirlpools in the depths. Without hesitation, Klein picked up the Miracle Invoker Beander characteristic. Its shape was like a heart, transparent like crystal, yet occasionally small bubbles would appear, and each bubble seemed to hide a kind of illusion. When this Beander characteristic came into contact with the liquid in the iron pot, it immediately merged into it, causing the darkness to instantly condense and become profound, as if countless eyes were simultaneously opening within it. After staring for a few seconds, Klein poured the prepared Miracle Invoker potion into a glass bottle and, through a ritual of bestowal, brought it to the real world. On an uninhabited island shrouded in thin mist in the Sonia Sea, Klein, who had teleported directly, looked at the potion in his hand, his eyes flickering for a few seconds before quickly returning to calmness. Klein picked up the bottle of potion and poured the liquid inside into his mouth. Success or failure depends on this one attempt. Chapter 339, on the verge of breaking out. With the help of faith, Klein gradually regained his humanity and memories, initially recovering to his state before consuming the potion. He murmured in a low voice, "Is that how it is?" When he was promoted to Sequence 2, an intense, terrifying, and lofty, irresistible will seemed to awaken slightly from the Beander characteristic integrated into his body. It transmitted scene after scene. Some of these scenes were about the mysticism knowledge of the miracle invoker, while others were grand spectacles of dust igniting into suns and the formation of various celestial bodies. They all carried the spiritual imprint of wildness, indifference, cruelty, madness, condescension, and lack of any emotion, rapidly assimilating Klein's spirit and making him unable to control his changing state. Klein knew that was the primordial one. Just as he had long anticipated, when he was promoted to Sequence 2, the primordial one had already begun to gradually revive within him, unable to contain himself. And due to his connection with Saphira Castle, the degree of the primordial one's revival within him was higher than that of other miracle invokers. Fortunately, those deep red stars and the numerous brilliant light spots, prayers from Tarot Club members like Justice came from within those stars, while prayers from members of the Abraham family mainly echoed within the light spots. Together, they created an image, shrouded in gray-white fog, compassionately watching the world, the image of a supreme and great hidden existence. For Klein, both of these anomalies were pollution. The spiritual imprint within the Beander characteristic wanted to turn him into the primordial one, while the anchor wanted to turn him into the fool. Yes, the anchor was the key to Klein regaining his humanity, but it was also a form of pollution. This is because the anchor was not a tool to help him maintain his humanity. Its main function was to form corresponding cognitions, positions, and images, to counteract the spiritual imprint within the Beander characteristic, maintaining a delicate balance. Under this balance, Klein's own humanity could barely be maintained, not being severely affected by either side. In other words, the gods perceived by believers are different from the actual gods. If there were no spiritual imprints within the Beander characteristic to counteract this influence, the image of the gods in their minds would gradually overwrite the gods' true appearance. It was only at this point that Klein understood why the Orthodox gods initially had human statues, but later all turned into holy emblems. This could prevent believers from forming a unified visual image, better utilizing the anchor's role in counteracting the residual spiritual imprint of the primordial one, rather than subtly changing themselves. Klein instantly thought of many things, then his thoughts turned, and he planned to return to the Fool. After becoming a miracle invoker, becoming him, and becoming the master of Saphira Castle, he no longer needed to take 4 reverse steps, chant incantations, or have all the Tarot Club members pray to easily return here. And since he had become a miracle invoker, Klein had to prepare for the next step. Although Zeratul had delivered himself, he was still missing a Sequence 1 Beander characteristic to reach Sequence 0. But just as he was preparing to leave, he suddenly saw a huge ship with sails silently sailing through the distant fog. This ship was not alone, many others followed it, 1, 2, 3. They formed a long fleet. In the entire Sonia Sea, only 2 fleets could have such a scale. One was the Sonia Sea fleet of the Ruined Kingdom, and the other was the Sonia Sea fleet of the Fasak Empire. And even those who didn't recognize the flags hanging on the ships could guess their departure point from the direction this fleet came from, Sunia Island. For both the Fasak Empire and the Ruined Kingdom, Sunia Island was a very important strategic location. If occupied by Ruin, the Fursak Eastern Navy would be blocked in the cold north, unable to contend for the various colonial islands in the Sonia Sea, and unable to go to East Balam. At the same time, after they launched a war, to threaten the Ruin heartland, they would have to cross the Amanda Mountains or pass through the Intersea, going through the defenses of several counties, which would be very, very difficult. And if Sunia Island was occupied by the Fasak Empire, departing from here, all ports in northern and central Ruin would be within striking distance, including but not limited to Emad Port and Pritz Harbor. If the Fursak commander was bolder and disregarded losses, they could even directly target Bakland, the capital of Ruin, which is not far from the port. It was precisely for this reason that the 2 countries erupted in the 20 Years' War, in which the Fasak Empire was victorious and gained the crucial Southern Passage. In the subsequent War of the Oathbreakers, Ruin won the war but failed to reclaim its territory, achieving only half of its strategic objectives. And now the Sonia Sea fleet of the Fasak Empire is advancing towards the Rorstad archipelago. What does this mean? Klein's expression changed slightly, because he thought of a word. War. The Fasak Empire is taking advantage of the heavy fog in the Sonia Sea to launch a surprise attack on the Ruined Kingdom's naval base. And since the Fasak Empire wants to launch a war, it will definitely not be limited to the Sonia Sea. In the northern Janai County and Winter County, there must also be corresponding Fasak Empire troops attempting to launch an attack. Thinking of this, Klein unhesitatingly gave up the idea of returning to the Fool and directly teleported back to Bakland. Pin Street 6. In the study, Melissa was studying hard for the upcoming entrance exam. Just as she was about to relax, her eyes blurred, and a man in a trench coat and top hat appeared silently in the study, startling her. Klein. Klein had no time for pleasantries and quickly asked, "It's me. Where's Benson?" Melissa stood up from her desk and asked somewhat strangely. "He's at work. Is something wrong?" Just as Klein was about to answer, his spiritual intuition was suddenly triggered. He turned sharply and walked to the window, opening it and looking at the sky. In the sky, which was not sparsely covered with clouds, airships painted in dark brown were densely approaching. These airships were painted with diagonally striped red, white, and yellow markings, which are the flag of Fersac. Klein said in a deep voice, "Melissa, come with me to St. Samuel Cathedral." Now, seeing him so serious, Melissa also became nervous. "Yes, now. What about Benson? I'll take you to the church first, and then I'll go find him." Klein reached out and grabbed Melissa's shoulder. The next moment, their figures disappeared from the study. They reappeared in the prayer hall of St. Samuel Cathedral. Melissa looked at everything happening before her eyes in surprise. Then she noticed a large amount of darkness suddenly appearing around the church, almost surrounding them in the blink of an eye. Melissa didn't understand the reason for this change, but Klein knew that this was a necessary precaution taken by the Church of the Night against the invasion of an angel. To avoid escalating the conflict, Klein waved his hand and displayed a badge, the night badge symbolizing the favor of the Evernight goddess. Of course, this was not a real night badge, but a replica Klein had obtained from a historical projection. The real night badge was in Ember's hands. Klein had seen it several times, which was why he could take it from a historical projection. As expected, the darkness around them silently receded, and an elderly man with no beard and deep eyes appeared before them. He was wearing a black robe with red patterns, and the 5 dark holy emblems on his chest indicated his identity: Archbishop of the Church of the Night, head of the Beckland Diocese, St. Archbishop Anthony Stevenson. Klein got straight to the point. "Viscount Black and I are friends." Archbishop St. Anthony asked in a calm tone. "Your Excellency, how can I help you?" Klein breathed a sigh of relief and said without hesitation, "This is the younger sister of a friend of mine. I have some things to deal with and cannot personally protect her, so I hope she and her brother can stay here and receive the goddess's protection." To gain Melissa's trust, he used the face of Klein Moretti when he returned to Backland, but changed to the face of Gehrman Sparrow when he came to the Church of the Night. Although it was only separated by a layer of veil, the other party could easily find out if they wanted to investigate, but Klein felt that this layer of screen was still necessary. As long as both sides had a tacit understanding and didn't expose it, it was fine. "No problem." St. Anthony smiled and nodded. "Your Excellency, you can go and do whatever you want." "Thank you." Klein nodded solemnly, then looked at Melissa beside him and instructed. "Melissa, stay here. Benson will be here soon." "Clee." Melissa opened her mouth but couldn't make a sound, because she was now just the younger sister of one of Klein's friends. The girl pursed her lips and whispered, "Thank you." Klein smiled, and his figure disappeared from the spot. Only Melissa and Archbishop St. Anthony were left in the prayer hall. But soon, Melissa suddenly noticed that the surrounding environment had changed. The location was still the prayer hall, but the girl heard the noisy discussions of people around her. She looked around and realized that the prayer hall she had thought was empty was actually already filled with people. Most of them had prominent identities, were dressed in luxurious clothes, and held extraordinary positions. They were all influential figures who affected the situation in ruin. But at this moment, the faces of these important figures were filled with anxiety and tension. And outside the church, there was a continuous stream of believers rushing towards this place. Clearly, these important figures had already realized what was going to happen in advance, just like Klein. "Melissa!" A shout came from the girl's ear. She subconsciously turned her head and saw a man with deep gray eyes, a slightly receding hairline, wearing a trench coat and red gloves, walking towards her. "Mr. Dunn." Melissa recognized the other party and knew he was Klein's former superior. She greeted him softly. Dunn Smith was visibly relieved when he saw Melissa, but then quickly asked, "Where is Benson?" Just as Melissa was about to answer, an anxious shout came from the doorway. "Melissa!" Both of them turned their heads at the same time and saw Benson standing at the church entrance, anxiously searching for Melissa's figure in the crowd. Outside St. Samuel Cathedral, Klein frowned as he watched the airship fleet in the sky drawing closer. It was no secret that Fersac had an airship fleet. In fact, the Ruined Kingdom also had its own airship fleet, but most of it was deployed on the border. And precisely because of this, the high-level officials of the Ruined Kingdom must have realized the threat of the airship fleet. Although the concept of air defense had just emerged, it was definitely not weak. The ruined kingdom knew well that its northern neighbor would not be too honest and could launch a war southward at any time, and it was impossible not to take any precautions against this. And under the premise that the ruined kingdom was prepared, the Fursak airship fleet being able to pass through the nearly 100 kilometers from the coast to Backland with extreme secrecy, undetected, definitely had the influence of Beyonder abilities. The pervasive heavy fog was the best cover, enough to make it impossible for ordinary people to see the airships flying high in the sky, providing sufficient concealment. In other words, this sneak attack must have been blessed by a weather warlock. Otherwise, even if they took a detour through sparsely populated areas, they would definitely have been spotted in advance and would have encountered the interception of the ruined airship fleet. The royal family of the Fursak Empire is the Einhorn family. They control the Hunter pathway, and it is not surprising that they have a sequence 2 feet weather warlock, but that is an angel. Since the 5th epoch, the number of times Beyonders of this level have appeared in wars has been extremely small. And for the Fursak Empire to ensure that this attack could proceed smoothly, they even directly had an angel take action. In a sense, this already signifies that the scale of this war is bound to far exceed people's expectations. Klein had long anticipated this war, so he knew that this war was destined to sweep the world. And once the war started, it would inevitably involve all levels, and even gods such as the Lord of Storms, the eternal blazing sun, the Earth Mother, the god of steam and machinery, and the god of knowledge and wisdom would have to choose their positions, and the contradictions between them that had been temporarily suppressed for 1 or 2,000 years would be completely intensified as a result. The Earth Mother likes giants, and even among her god-favored, there are Fosak. The Fenboot kingdom has deep-seated hatred for Ruin and Intis due to the division of Leuenberg, Masik, and Siegel. The will of the monarchy and the divine authority can most likely be unified, and it is very likely to ally with Fursak and attack Ruin and Intis from south to north. Of course, countries like Leuenberg and the Church of Knowledge in between will definitely put up resistance. The only variable is the Intis Republic. Theoretically, the Intis Republic should have a closer relationship with the Ruin Kingdom. The Fursak Empire and the Fenboot Kingdom are their common enemies, and the Steam Church also has large-scale missionary work in the Ruined Kingdom and has good relations with the Church of the Night and the Storm Church. On the other hand, the Eternal Blazing Sun and the Lord of Storms, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom are mortal enemies, and are likely to side with the God of Combat. Therefore, which side the Intis Republic leans towards will largely determine the outcome of this war. Klein withdrew his thoughts and looked at the airships in the sky. But this still couldn't explain one problem. While the Fursak Empire had a weather warlock providing cover, the Ruined Kingdom was not lacking in angels either. Theoretically, the angels of the Ruined Kingdom should have been able to react in time. So, what caused the angels of the Ruined Kingdom to fail to detect all of this abnormality? Klein posed the question, and soon came up with the answer. A word popped into his mind. Coincidence. The answer is that the Fursak Empire's airship fleet was able to reach Backland based on coincidence. And the angels of the Ruined Kingdom failed to discover it also because of coincidence. So, who is helping the Fursak Empire create coincidences? Chapter 340 Papaya Star Spirit. I forgot the rest. High-sequence Beyonders of the Visionary Pathway can write reality and artificially create coincidences. This was something Klein had known for a long time. It was just that back then, he wasn't sure at which sequence this high sequence gained the ability to write reality. But now, Klein had a sufficient understanding of the Visionary Pathway, so he was very clear that not all Beyonders of the Visionary Pathway possessed the ability to create coincidences, only the Sequence 1 author had the ability to write reality. And regardless of the pathway, there are only 3 copies of the Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristic. This meant that there would be at most 3 authors. Adam was that author, and he simultaneously possessed 2 copies of the Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristic and the uniqueness of the Visionary Pathway. And there was only 1 copy of the Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristic circulating outside, which was the sealed artifact, 008. Therefore, the only possibilities that could help the Fursak Empire create coincidences were these 2, either Adam or Ince Zangwil, who possessed the sealed artifact, 008. Adam's ritual to advance to Sequence 0 was to make the development of the era conform to his expectations, and then at key nodes, within the prescribed historical trends, consume the potion. Therefore, this war could be said to have been orchestrated by Adam, and the Twilight Hermit Order he established also played an important role in it. Furthermore, considering that Rosal the Great and George III were both members of the Twilight Hermit Order, the possibility that the Emperor of the Fursak Empire was not a member of the Twilight Hermit Order was very small, so it is almost certain that this war will develop in the direction Adam envisioned. Unless the gods personally intervened. But even if the gods personally intervened, all of this was probably within Adam's calculations. The Evernight goddess and the god of combat are hostile to each other. The god of knowledge and wisdom, the lord of storms, and the eternal blazing sun are hostile to each other. The Earth Mother is biased towards the god of combat, and the god of steam and machinery is wavering, but no matter how the situation develops, it will likely maintain a relatively stalemate for a long time to ensure that no god can change the development of the war situation in a short period of time with unmatched strength. From this perspective, Adam's action to help the Fasak Empire create coincidences is quite reasonable, as it fully aligns with Adam's interests. But Klein didn't think so. What Adam needed was the general trend. War was the general trend. As for who initiated this war and how it would ultimately develop, Adam didn't care at all. So, although he could use the influence of the Twilight Hermit Order to push the high-level officials of the Fasak Empire to launch a war, this did not mean he would personally interfere. Adam only needed war, and this goal had clearly been achieved. Excessive interference in the minor details would not only be of no benefit to Adam but would also invisibly increase many risks for him. Because although Adam is powerful, he is far from being invincible in the world. Even the relationship between the 7 orthodox gods and Adam is not harmonious. Who knows how many pairs of eyes are watching Adam in the dark? If Adam were to arbitrarily manipulate this war, he would eventually expose his location. Not only would he attract the pursuit of those powerful existences, but it would also disrupt his overall plan. This is not a situation Adam wants to see. Therefore, for Adam, he doesn't need to do anything now, he just needs to quietly wait for the right time. Adam might intervene at a critical moment to help stabilize the situation for a side that is about to collapse, in order to allow the war to continue better, but he would never clearly stand on any side at the beginning of the war. In this current air raid on Backland, although it sounds somewhat terrifying. But the Fasak Empire cannot occupy Backland with just one air raid, much less force the ruined kingdom to surrender with just one air raid. The greatest effect of their doing this is to weaken the morale of the ruined kingdom by bombing the capital, and even that is not guaranteed to succeed. Taking a step back, even if this air raid is a complete success, whether the goal of weakening the ruined kingdom's morale can be achieved is another matter. The ruined kingdom might indeed have greatly reduced morale due to the bombing of its capital, but it is also equally possible that this incident will make them resist the invasion of the Fasak Empire more bravely. From any perspective, Adam has no reason to help the Fasak Empire's airship force create coincidences. Therefore, the answer is already obvious. Ince Zangwill. Klein's eyes suddenly became deep. If it wasn't a coincidence created by Adam, then only Ince Zangwill, who holds 008, has the ability to do all this. Although this is just a guess, proving all this is very simple. Klein pulled out a gold coin from the historical void, tossed it into the air casually, and softly chanted. Ince Zangwill is with the Fasak airship force. Clink. The gold coin bounced up and fell, landing in Klein's palm, heads up. This indicates affirmation. Ince Zangwill is in one of the airships above Klein. This is not strange. Although Ince Zangwill holds 008, and has the ability to write reality, he is not Adam after all, and his range of ability cannot cover the entire world. One city is already the limit. Therefore, for Ince Zangwill to help the Fasak Empire's airship force create enough coincidences, he must stay on the airship at all times, keeping pace with the location of the airship force. Klein looked at the airship force getting closer in the sky and suddenly laughed out loud. Coincidences, created by Ince Zangwill, are very subtle. Even if the military and the 3 great churches detect something unusual, they will only think that the person in charge of anti-aircraft defense was negligent, or was simply bribed by the Fasak Empire, which is why they allowed the Fasak Empire's airship force to penetrate deep without realizing that it was all just because of coincidence. If Klein hadn't been tricked by 008 too many times, becoming almost like a startled bird when it came to coincidences, he probably wouldn't have been able to detect this point. However, should he say he was lucky, or should he say Ince Zangwill was unlucky? From the evil god descent incident planned in Tingen, to the Great Smog incident in Backland, and now this airship air raid incident, each time was planned by Ince Zangwill, and each time Klein happened to be present. It was as if fate itself decreed that Klein should complete his revenge. Dash. A large and orderly Fasak airship force cut in from the North District, arriving above this metropolis. As soon as they approached, places like the Holy Wind Cathedral seemed to have made some preparations. The whistling wind suddenly intensified, turning into streaks of dark green giant blades that howled towards their targets, like anti-aircraft shells. Seeing these giant blades about to strike the airship formation's balloons, an invisible defense became prominent, blocking all the attacks outside. Under the violent bombardment, this transparent, wall became shaky, but it ultimately held up. At the same time, on the hulls of the airships, cannon muzzles, machine gun ports, and dropping ports opened one after another, aiming downwards. Bang! As the hurricane formed around the Holy Wind Cathedral, an explosive sound spread in all directions. In such a terrifying storm, those airships were like ships sailing on the sea, rising and falling in mountain-like waves, about to be thrown far away. Just then, on the leading airship, a light that mingled blood and rust flashed, covering all its companions, connecting them one after another. Suddenly, the Fasak airship fleet stabilized in the hurricane, no longer like tiny ships in giant waves. The high-level power of the Red Priest pathway belongs to war, and war is the art of gathering the masses. This is the authority of a war bishop. Although the military and the major churches had some preparations, it wasn't much. Once the offensive launched by the Holy Wind Cathedral failed, the entire city's air defense suddenly fell into a vacuum. Backland was like a little girl who had taken off her clothes and was lying on the ground, allowing the airship force to drop bomb after bomb on her. Although the presence of the hurricane made the bombs' landing points less precise, this did not render the bombs ineffective. Boom! Boom! Amidst the continuous explosions, sparks also flashed from the corresponding muzzles of the airships, fully displaying the joy of the god of combat. This airship fleet did not attempt to cross Backland. After entering the North District, they immediately turned towards the West End, which was the political center of the ruined kingdom. The Fosak were well aware that the Loan were just slow to react, not that they truly had no way to deal with them. If they continued to stay in the North District, by the time the Loan came to their senses, the greatly enhanced anti-aircraft capabilities would be sufficient to completely destroy the Fasak airship force. Therefore, they had to maximize their gains before the Loan could react. The defense of the Holy Wind Cathedral fell into a vacuum, powerless to intercept, and could only watch the Fasak airship force turn. And the citizens below the airships, looking at the airships raging above, couldn't help but feel despair. But in despair, there will always be people who hope for a miracle. Hoping that someone can stop those Fosak. And just then, among the Fasak airship force, a tens of meters long airship in the front row suddenly expanded violently. Boom! Amidst the violent explosion that spread throughout Backland, the airship turned into a swelling giant fireball, emitting light and heat like a second sun, and finally plummeted from the sky. And this was just the beginning. Boom! Another airship exploded without warning. The rising fireball coincidentally crashed into an adjacent airship, and amidst the violent explosion, the airship's balloon was pierced through the middle by the fireball that was its ally. And these two airships, which had turned into fireballs, once again crashed into another airship that was turning to evade on the other side. And just as the third airship was about to be hit, a layer of crystal clear and sturdy frost quickly condensed on the surface of the two fireballs. The low temperature extinguished the flames and also caused the two damaged airships to plummet rapidly towards the ground. On the outskirts of the North District, a middle-aged man in a Fasak Empire military uniform quietly appeared in front of Klein, his expression extremely grim, and said in a deep voice, "Your Excellency, you have gone too far." Klein sized up the brown-haired, gray-eyed Fosak man who was over 2 meters 5 tall and asked in return, "Too far?" The middle-aged man said coldly, "An angel can easily destroy the Fasak airship force, but can also instantly destroy a city. Or do you think we cannot do such a thing?" Klein immediately showed an expression of sudden realization. Indeed, let alone an angel, even a demigod could easily destroy tens of thousands of mortal troops. And an angel personally intervening could instantly reverse the outcome of the war. Demigods were one thing, but angels were equivalent to the atomic bombs of Klein's previous life. In a situation where one side unilaterally possessed atomic bombs, they could conduct risk-free nuclear deterrence and nuclear blackmail against the other side. But if both sides possessed atomic bombs, then they would have to consider the risk of mutual destruction caused by throwing atomic bombs at each other. Therefore, under normal circumstances, angels from any side would exercise restraint and not participate in wars below the angel level. Mortals belong to mortals, and angels belong to angels. The angels of the ruined kingdom could instantly destroy the entire airship force, and the angels of the Fasak Empire could also carry out equivalent retaliation, instantly destroying the entire Backland. And Klein's action clearly broke the rule. However, Klein chuckled softly and said, "You seem to have misunderstood something. What I'm doing has nothing to do with national sentiment, it's purely a personal vendetta." The middle-aged man's expression darkened, and he said in a deep voice, "Whose worshipper are you, Evernight, or Storm?" Klein curled the corner of his mouth, revealing a smile that wasn't quite a smile. "I believe in the fool." The middle-aged man's expression changed slightly. This was the situation he feared the most. The premise for the mutual restraint of angels from both sides was that they belonged to the Ruined Kingdom and the Fasak Empire. But if the angel in front of him was in existence from a third-party force, that party wouldn't care if you retaliated equally. I destroy your airship force, and you destroy Backland. What does the damage to the interests of the Ruined Kingdom and the Fasak Empire have to do with me? Under normal circumstances, a wild angel would not provoke any major power without reason. Unless he wished to be jointly hunted down by angels from other forces. But now, the other party stated very clearly, this is purely a personal vendetta. The middle-aged man's face was so grim it looked like it could drip water, and he said in a deep voice. I don't know you at all. Klein still smiled. I never said it was a personal vendetta against you. Then it's against the Fasak Empire, Your Excellency. You need to think carefully. It's not the Fasak Empire either. Then who is it? The middle-aged man's eyes narrowed, almost certain that the other party was deliberately causing trouble. Klein looked at a certain airship in the sky and slowly uttered a name. Ince Zangwil. The middle-aged man remained silent, but his eyes changed slightly. Klein took all of this in, and his tone was calm as he said. Hand him over to me, and I can leave immediately. The middle-aged man's expression sank, and he flatly denied. The person you were looking for is not here. Klein couldn't help but laugh out loud. He wasn't surprised by this answer at all, and he never expected the other party to compromise. Rather, this was the answer he wanted. Chapter 341, War is like this. So, there's nothing to discuss. Klein pointed his finger at an airship overhead and asked in a cold tone. The middle-aged man opposite him had a grim expression, neither answering nor reacting. In truth, Klein hadn't done anything to the airships that had crashed earlier. Their downfall was entirely due to their own reasons. Just as Ince Zangwil manipulated coincidences to achieve his goals, Klein had merely borrowed a little from Miracle. That's why those airships miraculously self-destructed, and then miraculously crashed into another airship nearby. In a sense, this was also a coincidence. But this time, the miracle seemed not to have occurred. Bang! The airship overhead made a soft sound, and its hull tilted sharply, but thankfully, it managed to stabilize in the end. Clearly, it wasn't that the miracle didn't happen, but that someone prevented the miracle from happening. This person could only be Ince Zangwil. Klein used miracle to create coincidences, while Ince Zangwil used coincidences to create miracles. Coincidence against coincidence, miracle against miracle. The outcome was unknown. Klein chuckled lightly, the sound particularly grating to the middle-aged man's ears. It seems Your Excellency is sincerely making an enemy of the Fasak Empire. The middle-aged man finally reacted, his gaze fixed coldly on Klein. And at the same time, all the airship formations in the sky suddenly turned, aiming their cannons and machine guns at Klein from all directions simultaneously. That was the Beander ability belonging to the Red Priest Pathways Sequence 3 Feet War Bishop. They could communicate telepathically with their comrades, acting as one entity. In other words, the War Bishop could gather their strength and also transfer his own strength to them. Even if the pilots operating the airships were just mortals, under the enhancement of the War Bishop's Beander ability, they could, to some extent, be considered part of the War Bishop, or even a part of the Weather Warlock. And the cannonballs containing Beander power were enough to kill Beyonders of the same level. Bang 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 bang. The cannons and machine guns of the airships simultaneously spat out tongues of fire, the intense light even dimming the sky. Countless large-caliber bullets and cannonballs formed a dense metal net, lunging at Klein with bared fangs and claws. Klein watched the metal storm approaching, neither dodging nor avoiding, merely chuckling softly. The next moment, his main body quickly entered the historical void within the gray fog and disappeared. For Beyonders of the Seer pathway. In terms of frontal combat power, they weren't among the top in any pathway. But in terms of Ostrangenis and evasion abilities, almost no one could surpass them. Even Beyonders from the Marauder and Apprentice pathways could only compare with Beyonders from the Seer pathway. Boom! The bombardment completely engulfed the spot where Klein had stood. The forest trees were utterly destroyed, and the previously flat ground nearby was completely plowed over, leaving no flat land, only craters left by the cannonballs everywhere. And as the smoke and dust cleared, Klein's figure appeared not far away. He didn't rush to counterattack but reached out his right hand and grabbed at the air in front of him. After 5 consecutive grabs, Klein's arm muscles suddenly tensed, as if pulling something extremely heavy. As he retracted his right hand, a figure quickly materialized. This figure had bronze skin, a medium build, black hair, brown eyes, soft features, and a very small black mole below his right ear. It was Azik Eggers. Even though Mr. Azik had lost his memory, his essence was still that of a Sequence 2 angel, the former, Death Consul. Klein didn't examine him further, and reached out again, grabbing into the void. A female figure wearing a complex, luxurious, yet dim and gloomy black long dress was slowly outlined. She had no head, there was a neat cut at her neck, and her drooping hands held 4 identical heads with blonde hair and red eyes, each with a bright and vivid appearance. It was Renette Tinakel, Sequence 2, Ancient Bane. As soon as these two appeared, the middle-aged man's expression became even gloomier. For Beyonders of the Red Priest pathway, or indeed for Beyonders of any pathway, high-sequence Beyonders of the Seer pathway were the most annoying. Even a regular Sequence 3 feet Scholar of Yore was troublesome enough for an angel. Because although the opponent lacked the ability to defeat an angel head-on, they were sufficiently disgusting. He couldn't beat you, but he could run, and you would have a hard time catching him. And the person before him was not only a Scholar of Yore, but also a Sequence 2 feet Miracle Invoker. This meant that fighting him would only be even more disgusting. Klein didn't hesitate. For the third time, he reached out and grabbed into the void. This time, he seemed to grab onto nothing, but in reality, he had summoned himself from a dozen seconds ago, himself in a concealed state. Having done all this, Klein's main body quickly entered the historical void within the gray fog. Meanwhile, within his past self, consciousness suddenly awakened, becoming extremely lively. Along the way, Klein had deeply understood one truth. Playing it safe can prevent death. Having become a miracle invoker, Klein profoundly realized how strong the Seer pathway's life-saving ability truly was. If Zeratul hadn't been greedy and tried to seize the Fool's uniqueness, actively delivering himself to Ember, but instead found a place to hide properly, even Ember might not have been able to find him. Therefore, Klein deeply absorbed Zeratul's lesson. No matter when, he must never forget that playing it safe was the Seer pathway's strongest Beyonder ability. It didn't matter even if the historical projections he summoned were completely destroyed, they were just historical projections, dead was dead, it wouldn't affect the main body. Under these circumstances, he was already in an invincible position. How could the opponent fight him? Of course, the historical projections Klein could summon were far more than just these two, and the reason he chose to summon Mr. Isaac and Miss Messenger was, firstly, because their relationship with him was closer, making the summoning easier. Because to summon images from the historical void, 3 conditions must be met. First, the more detailed and accurate the understanding of the corresponding history and matters, the greater the chance of success and the longer the duration. Second, the lower the target sequence compared to oneself, the greater the chance of success and the longer the duration. Conversely, when the summoned target is someone or something with a sequence higher than oneself, even if successful with difficulty, the resulting projection will only be a partial manifestation of power and characteristics, not a complete entity. And most importantly, the closer the target's relationship with oneself, the higher the chance of success and the longer the duration. In other words, if a Scholar of Yore wants to summon the image of a great figure from the historical void, it's best to establish a sufficiently friendly relationship with them and maintain it for a long time. And Mr. Isaac and Miss Messenger perfectly fit these 2 conditions. Among all the angels Klein had come into contact with, these 2 had the closest relationship with Klein, and Klein was most familiar with them. Choosing to summon them was based both on the consideration of success rate and the degree of power consumption. They were angels, and Klein himself was also an angel. Therefore, the historical projections of the 2 he summoned would not lose too much power, even if not as strong as the main bodies, the difference wouldn't be significant. Even if they couldn't fully utilize their strength due to lacking self-awareness, the 2 of them combined were enough to hold back the angel in front of him. Mr. Isaac, with his indifferent gaze and cold expression, scanned the surroundings. His body suddenly expanded, transforming into a giant serpent that obscured the sky. This serpent was both illusory and real, seemingly composed of things humans could not understand. Its entire body was covered in large, dark green scales, with pure white feathers growing in the gaps. Each feather and scale bore strange symbols of different shapes, just seeing them would cause flesh and blood to rot, turning people into zombies. This was the feathered serpent god from the myths and legends of the South Continent. Pale flames burned in his eye sockets, and a pair of exaggerated and thick feathered wings unfolded behind him. With a whooshing sound, the feathered serpent coiled in midair, extended its upper body forward and opened its mouth, spitting out pale flames capable of completely covering the airship fleet in front of it. Even if it was just a historical projection, a Sequence 2 angel was absolutely incomparable to mortals. And just then, between the giant serpent and the airship fleet, large amounts of ice crystals, howling strong winds, and thin mist appeared simultaneously. The ice crystals condensed into floating, crystalline walls, blocking the pale flames. Although the ice crystals themselves were greatly melted by the pale flames, more ice crystals quickly filled the gaps, making it difficult for the pale flames to break through at all. The strong winds howled around the periphery, scattering the seemingly substantial pale flames bit by bit. And under the cover of the thin mist, the Fursak airship fleet had already begun to turn and retreat. Even with the enhancement of the War Bishop's power, even if they were now considered part of the Weather Warlock, mortals were mortals after all. In this war of angels, they could hardly play their intended role and would instead be picked off as weaknesses. The Weather Warlock of the Fursak Empire understood that due to the interference of Klein, this uninvited guest, their air raid was destined to fail. The only thing they could do now was to try their best to preserve this airship fleet. Otherwise, once the airship fleet suffered heavy losses, it would be the ruined kingdom's airship fleet's turn to bomb St. Milan. And if such a thing really happened, the Fursak Empire couldn't possibly expect an angel to appear in St. Milan and help them defend against the ruined kingdom's airship fleet because of personal grudges, could they? Trying to run. Klein's historical projections gaze sharpened. He used to be a low-sequence Beander, with no room to resist Ince Zangwill. But now, he was a Sequence 2 Miracle Invoker, and Ince Zangwill was at best a Sequence 3. If Ince Zangwill could escape right under his nose even now, then his promotion to Sequence 2 would have been in vain. Just as Klein was about to make a move, his peripheral vision caught sight of one airship in the Fursak airship fleet separating from the formation and flying in the opposite direction. Klein immediately understood that this was the Fosak's tactic to lure the tiger away from the mountain. They intended to use one airship to lure Klein away, thereby preserving the entire airship fleet. And one airship couldn't possibly lure Klein away, unless Ince Zangwill was on that airship. Klein's expression shifted. He took out a gold coin from the historical projection. He needed to perform a divination. On Blue Mountain Island, where the city of Generosity, Byam, is located. Within a previously uninhabited jungle, a large clearing capable of accommodating tens of thousands of people had been cleared. The clearing was filled with a large number of temporary tents that had already been set up, and many hired workers were busy transporting various building materials. Directing the workers was a man wearing gold-rimmed glasses, looking like a university professor. Such a refined scholar, who should have been teaching students knowledge in a university, was now in the wild jungle, under the scorching sun, directing workers. But there was no complaint on his face. Instead, he worked with great enthusiasm. Not far from the clearing, there was a natural harbor, where several large ships laden with supplies were docked. Just then, the man with the gold-rimmed glasses seemed to sense something and turned his head to look at the untouched primary jungle on his right. A familiar figure walked out from it, followed by several unusually tall humans. Veildu hurried forward and respectfully called out, "Ancestor. Well done." Bethel Abraham smiled and praised him, then looked up and explained to Colin Iliad, the chief of the City of Silver, who was beside him. "This is your new home, but you'll have to make do with tents for now before the houses are built." Colin shook his head, looking up at the scorching sun in the sky and said, "No, it's already very good." They had experienced worse situations. Compared to the forsaken land of the gods, this world before them was simply paradise. Colin lowered his head slightly and recited sincerely from the bottom of his heart. "Praise the fool." Chief Anshina, a female member of the exploration team, couldn't help but ask, "When can we go back and tell the others this good news?" Upon hearing this, the people from the City of Silver all turned their gazes towards Colin. Although they had arrived in the world of light promised by the gods, their families were still in the City of Silver. Moreover, if they didn't return for too long, their families would worry if something had happened to them. Bethel Abraham said with a smile, "You can go back anytime, just pray to Mr. Fool and state your wish. Of course, you need to wait a while. Mr. Fool is currently busy with another matter." Derek subconsciously asked, "What matter?" "War." Bethel Abraham still smiled as he answered. Without waiting for the people from the City of Silver to respond, Bethel spoke again. "Veildu, I'll leave these people to you to settle." "Yes, Ancestor." Veildu replied respectfully. The next moment, Bethel Abraham's figure silently vanished from everyone's sight. Colin was not surprised by this. An angel must have his own duties and couldn't stay with them all the time. Veildu asked in giant language, "What should I call you?" The chief showed a friendly smile. "Colin Iliad, just call me Colin." Veildu also smiled. "All right, Lord Colin, let me give you a brief introduction first. This is Blue Mountain Island. This land has been purchased by the Abraham family, and you can do anything here. Also, this place is very close to Byam, but it's best if you don't go there during this time. Lowen and Fursak have already erupted in war, and you could easily be arrested as Fosak spies." Chapter 342, the crescent moon shines upon all 9 provinces. Empress Burrow, inside the luxurious Hall family villa. Hearing the explosion, Audrey immediately concealed dragon scales under her skin and rushed to the window. Watching the Fasak Empire airship formation appear in the sky, witnessing bombs being blown off course by hurricanes, thrown far away, exploding upon landing, or disappearing directly as if entering the spirit world, a word that had been mentioned several times before flashed through Audrey's mind. War. War had truly broken out, and it was happening right beside her. The bombing didn't last long. The Fasak Empire airship unit, originally located in the sky above the North District, had already begun to turn, and judging by their direction of travel, they were heading towards the Empress Burrow. Is Fasak going to bomb the Empress Burrow? No, not the Empress Burrow, it's the West End. Although the Empress Burrow is home to a large number of nobles, bombing these nobles would not bring any benefit to the Fasak. It would even provoke retaliatory actions from the Ruined Kingdom, and those Fasak nobles would not be safe either. So their target is the West End, where the Royal Parliament, City Hall, and various important government departments are located. As long as these important facilities can be destroyed, even if the personnel evacuate in advance, it will be enough to cause chaos in the Ruined Kingdom's government for a while. This is extremely important for the attacks launched by the Fasak in other directions. Audrey saw through it all and immediately guessed the strategic intention of the Fasak. But she still didn't dare to be careless, because even if the Fosak's target was the West End, they would inevitably pass through the Empress Burrow. No one could guarantee that the Fasak wouldn't, casually, drop a couple of bombs while passing through the Empress Burrow. Just then, the girl's door was pushed open. Mrs. Caitlin quickly walked into the room and said rapidly, "Audrey, hurry, let's go to the nearby church. There's an underground area there where we can hide from the air raid." The Countess was clearly extremely nervous, but her expression remained calm. "No, Mom." Audrey shook her head and said softly. "The basement of the villa is fine, we don't have time to go to the church anymore." The Countess's decision was actually not wrong. The Fasak Empire airships had already begun to turn and would arrive at the Empress Burrow soon. Out of trust in the Church of the Night, the Countess would naturally choose to go to the church for shelter immediately, and this decision was based on the premise that the church would be safer than the villa. And for Mrs. Caitlin, the church would always be safer than staying at home. But for Audrey, staying at home was actually safer than going to the church. Firstly, the Fasak Empire airships were directly overhead, and going out now would increase the risk of bombing. And if they stayed in the basement of the house, Audrey could completely protect her family with her own strength. At least she was already a demigod, while the Church of the Night only had Archbishop St. Anthony as a demigod. At this moment, Archbishop St. Anthony would definitely be in charge of the overall situation at St. Samuel Cathedral and would not appear in a small church in the Empress Burrow. At most, there would only be one bishop there, with a sequence no higher than sequence 5. So compared to the church, the villa was actually the safest place. Hearing this, Mrs. Caitlin hesitated for a while, but in the end, she chose to trust her daughter's choice and turned around to instruct. "Annie, organize the other servants to hide in the basement. Don't worry about protecting important property, prioritize your own safety." "Yes, madam." Audrey's personal maid, Annie, nodded quickly and then ran downstairs to relay Mrs. Caitlin's order to the others. Seeing that Audrey was still standing by the window with no intention of leaving, Caitlin reminded her anxiously. "Audrey, we should go." "Okay." Audrey responded, preparing to hide in the basement with her mother, but her peripheral vision suddenly caught sight of a fireball. Boom! Amidst a violent explosion that spread throughout the city, an airship overhead instantly turned into a fireball and fell from the sky. Then came the second one. The second one crashed into the third, and both airships crashed simultaneously. What's going on? Audrey was a little surprised. Was it a counterattack from the church and the military? But she clearly didn't see any Beander abilities or shell trajectories. Those few airships seemed to have suddenly self-destructed. Before the girl could react, those airships suddenly stopped advancing simultaneously and aimed their cannons at a certain location. That direction was the suburbs of the North District. Bang 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 bang. Bombardment wasn't enough. The Fasak airship unit actually began to turn after a round of bombardment. For some reason, they gave up continuing towards the Empress Burrow and instead flew towards the suburbs of the North District. They're turning. Why? What on earth is going on? Who are they attacking? Audrey immediately cleared her thoughts. Someone had attracted the Fosak's firepower, making the Fosak believe that they had to kill that person first even if it meant abandoning their original target. What kind of existence could have such ability? A demigod? No, a demigod is far from enough. The number of demigods in the Fasak Empire would not be less than that in the Ruined Kingdom. And since they dared to attack Backland, they must have been prepared for being blocked by the Ruined Kingdom's demigods. In other words, there must be multiple demigods on the airships, ready to deal with the Ruined Kingdom's demigods at any time. And since a demigod is not enough, then there is only one answer. Angel. An angel has drawn away the entire FASAC airship unit. Those few self-destructing airships are also the work of that angel. So, which angel would that be? A corresponding name immediately came to Audrey's mind. Karula. She didn't know many angels, but she mostly only knew their names. The only one she was truly familiar with was Karula. As for Ember, in Audrey's heart, Ember had always been on the same level as the gods. If he were to make a move, it wouldn't be one or two airships exploding, but the entire airship unit would be annihilated in an instant. Audrey, what's going on? The Countess looked at the sky and asked hesitantly. She had also seen the anomaly in the sky, which was why she hadn't disturbed Audrey for so long. Although her judgment of the unfolding events was not as accurate as Audrey's, she could also see that the FASAC airship unit was moving away from the Empress Burrow. I don't know, Mom. Audrey shook her head, but then said softly. However, I think we probably don't need to hide in the basement for now. As expected of the angel who is best at war, Klein, who had teleported onto the airship, couldn't help but exclaim. The Red Priest pathway, in terms of frontal combat power alone, might not be the strongest, but it could rank among the top. However, when it comes to the amplification and application of war, it is truly unparalleled. A high-sequence Beyander of the Red Priest pathway, if alone, might not pose much of a threat. But if this high-sequence Beyander enters the army, with their telepathic connection to the army, they can directly raise the combat power of both sides by more than one level. Even a high-sequence Beyander of the same level from the giant pathway, if not careful, might suffer a crushing defeat on the spot. So even with Mr. Azik and Miss Messenger working together, they still couldn't do anything about that. Weather Warlock, and Mr. Azuk's historical projection was even almost dispersed at one point. However, in any case, the goal of tying down the opponent had been achieved. And Klein, who had confirmed through divination that Ince Zangwil was on this airship, also quietly teleported up while the two sides were in a chaotic battle. As if by fate, as soon as he teleported up, he ran right into the man who was about to escape, his face unusually pale. The other party wore a double-breasted pure black clerical robe, a soft hat, dark gold hair, and blue eyes that were almost black. He had a high nose bridge, tightly pursed lips, and features like a classical sculpture with no wrinkles. The most striking feature was a blind eye. It was Ince Zangwil. Even though he had long betrayed the Church of the Night, he still wore the Church of the Night's clerical robe, which was undoubtedly a satire. And although the other party possessed the ability to rewrite reality with 008, he also had to constantly endure the backlash brought by 008. That unusually pale face was the best proof. It was precisely because of the internal conflict with 008 that the current Ince Zangwil remained at sequence 4. This was both because the internal conflict caused the digestion of the potion to become incredibly slow, and because he feared that during the advancement process, certain coincidences would occur due to the backlash of 008, leading to failure in advancement and subsequent loss of control. The moment he discovered Klein, Ince Zangwil still wanted to resist. But even if he possessed 008, how could he possibly be the opponent of a true angel? With almost no effort, Klein easily turned him into his puppet. And the quill pen numbered 008 also fell to the ground and was picked up by Klein. Then, Klein turned and left, leaving the scene. Only the exploding airship remained, as well as the Weather Warlock, who had finally shaken off the entanglement of Mr. Azik and Miss Messenger, and was now in a state of powerless rage upon seeing this. Everything went so smoothly, like a beautiful dream. Yes, a beautiful dream. Klein, who was always clear-headed in dreams, as soon as he teleported to the airship, found himself in a real dream woven by someone else. As for being in a real dream, Klein pretended not to notice and followed the guidance of the dream to find the Ince Zangwil from his memory, and turned the other party into his puppet. In reality, Klein's main body was controlling the other party by searching for the target's spirit body thread, thereby taking control. Found it. Klein's expression shifted, and he immediately began to silently control that spirit body thread. But just as Klein was about to control that spirit body thread, the real dream he was in silently disappeared, and everything around him returned to normal. He was in a lush forest, with airships flying into the distance overhead. An ordinary-looking old man floated in midair, looking at Klein calmly, and sighed, saying in the Fusite language, "You are not confused by the dream I weave. This old man's hair was completely white but thick enough, with few wrinkles on his face and no distinctive features. An angel of the visionary pathway. Klein stared at him intently, making no response. He was still trying to invade the other party's spirit-body thread, but the other party was clearly prepared. What appeared before him was not the main body. The old man floating in midair, wearing a gray and white robe, said gently, "I actually don't want to be your enemy. Let them deal with their matters. How about we talk?" They. Which they? Klein's expression shifted slightly. Since the other party was an angel of the visionary pathway, he must have an inextricable connection with the Twilight Hermit Order. Then, it was easy to deduce that they included Adam. This was not surprising. Although this war was long planned by the Fasak Empire, Adam was the real mastermind. Although Adam would not favor any side, allowing the war to become one-sided, the other party would definitely make a move. Because for him to become a god, he must first capture Ince Zangwil and obtain 008 from him. And the reason this old man in front of him was blocking him was to clear the way for Adam. Klein suddenly asked, "Don't you want to become a god?" The other party was an angel, but at most only a sequence 2 angel. Adam could become a god by obtaining 008, and the old man could also go further by obtaining 008, becoming a sequence 1 angel. At that time, he might have a chance to compete with Adam for the sequence 0 throne. Klein didn't believe that the other party had no such thoughts at all. If you don't believe it, ask the ancient sun god back then, ask if the king of angels under him had this idea. If not, then how did the current Lord of Storms, eternal blazing sun, and god of knowledge and wisdom come about? Hearing this, the old man couldn't help but laugh dumbfoundedly. You don't need to provoke me, it's useless. Even if I can become sequence 1, I won't have a chance to compete with him for the sequence 0 position. Moreover, I am not him, I cannot arrange such a ritual again, and I don't have the time to arrange it. What's more, the old man chuckled. Becoming a true god is not necessarily a good thing. Compared to bearing responsibilities that I am destined not to be able to bear, I am quite good as I am now. Klein's expression remained unchanged. He could tell that the other party's desire to stop him was not particularly strong, otherwise, he wouldn't have suggested talking to him. Of course, it might also be that he deliberately showed it to paralyze him. So, behind the white-robed old man, Renette Tinacle, wearing a somber and complex long dress, walked out. That was not a historical projection, but a true angel. One of the golden-haired, red-eyed heads she was holding immediately spat out a rectangular diamond-like charm, while another head chanted in ancient Hermes language. Yesterday's reappearance. That was a charm Klein made when he advanced to sequence 3 feet Scholar of Yore, inspired by one of his Beander abilities. It allowed him to briefly borrow power from his past self. For Miss Messenger, who was not in a complete state, this charm had a miraculous effect. However, that charm did not change at all. The old man floating in midair, wearing a gray and white robe, chuckled softly and kindly reminded. Don't use ancient Hermes language in front of me. Chapter 343, An Old Cow Wearing a Bra. Hermes, the Hermes who created the ancient Hermes language. Regarding the identity of the old man who introduced himself, Klein felt both surprised and that it was within reason. This was because he had confirmed in Rosal the Great's diary that Hermes was among the members of the Twilight Hermit Order. And an existence capable of living from the 2nd epoch to the 5th epoch, spanning thousands of years, must be an angel. And even for an organization as colossal as the Twilight Hermit Order, the number of angels they possessed must be very limited. After all, the Twilight Hermit Order had no true god, and the angels they could attract were only those whose pathway had no true god, and who themselves did not have faith in any true god. And since the Twilight Hermit Order was making a move, only sending an angel could stop Klein, who was also an angel. And in that case, the chance of encountering Hermes wouldn't be too small. Numerous thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, while Renette Tinacle's other 2 heads had already chanted in giant and elf languages respectively. Yesterday. If Hermes language cannot be used, then don't use it. This world is not only Hermes language. The diamond-shaped rectangular charm was instantly ignited by transparent flames and melted into the void. Renette Tinacle's body began to swell rapidly, and the 4 heads in his hands flew up simultaneously, landing on his neck. These 4 heads successively became illusory, overlapping into one. In an instant, Renette Tinacle turned into a massive castle-sized rag doll, wearing a black Gothic dress covered in countless mysterious symbols and entwined with strange vines, his eyes a blood-red color. His gaze swept over Hermes from ancient times, his tightly closed mouth opened, but no sound came out. Hermes seemed to not react, and a faint light flashed, instantly turning into a fat white rabbit. Ancient Bane, Transfiguration Curse. The rabbit wasn't panicked at all, its body began to swell, becoming as large as half a mountain, capable of crushing Klein with 1 foot. For an angel of the spectator pathway, I believe that if I am strong enough, I will be strong enough, and I will not be constrained by external appearance. Gehrman Sparrow, this crazy adventurer became an angel at some point, or perhaps he was originally an angel disguised as a Sequence 5. But in any case, he happened to discover Ins Zangwill's whereabouts. This angel doesn't mind hindering Faceac's offensive incidentally, and Ins Zangwill is the best excuse. Facing an angel of unknown origin, Alhomatova Einhorn does not want to be his enemy. Therefore, handing over Ins Zangwill is the best choice, which can allow the Faceac Empire's bombing plan to continue. A classical quill pen stained with no ink seemed to be held by an invisible hand, writing rapidly on an ordinary notebook. Suddenly, a slightly pale hand reached out and grasped the quill pen. The owner of the hand had dark gold hair, facial features as profound as a classical statue, one eye deep blue, almost black, and the other covered in tiny, distinct blood vessels. He lowered his wrist and continued to write. Alhomatova Einhorn knows very well that Gehrman Sparrow's demand for Ins Zangwill is just an excuse, and even if Ins Zangwill is handed over, the other party will not leave. And in the plan to bomb Backland, Ins Zangwill plays a crucial role. Handing him over now would be disheartening. And if Ins Zangwill is kept, with the assistance of 008, he can provide a great advantage to Faceac in some key battles. Considering all this, Alhomatova Einhorn refused Gehrman Sparrow's request. Marks of crossing out. The battle is imminent. Alhomatova Einhorn is entangled by the historical projection summoned by Gehrman Sparrow, making it difficult to escape for a short time. But Gehrman Sparrow is also lured away by the diversion tactic, turning to track the airship used as bait, which is reasonable. As a miracle invoker, Gehrman Sparrow certainly made a divination in advance, but divination is not always reliable. In the depths of the unknown, a certain existence interfered with his divination for some reason, making him firmly believe that Ins Zangwill was on that airship, which is reasonable. Gehrman Sparrow possesses the Beyander ability of teleportation, which allows him to go directly to the airship, and the bait will soon be exposed. But an angel who happened to be passing by noticed all this. He was very interested in Gehrman Sparrow and took the initiative to interfere with Gehrman Sparrow's actions, which is reasonable. Everything developed as Ins Zangwill had anticipated. Gehrman Sparrow was restrained by Hermes, and Alhomatova Einhorn was restrained by the historical projection summoned by Gehrman Sparrow. Both sides found it difficult to escape. In this chaotic situation, no one noticed Ins Zangwill's departure. The airship fleet sailed northeast, they were leaving Backland, leaving the ruined kingdom, heading to Pritz Harbor for bombing. The Faceac Empire's attack was synchronized. While the airship force was bombing Backland, the conquest fleet had already begun attacking industrial cities along the intersea coast such as Constant. The two-headed giant legion had also moved south, invading the Amanda Mountains in Winter County. And the Sonia Sea fleet would take advantage of the cover of thick fog to attack Pritz Harbor. And now, the mission to bomb Backland ended in failure. The airship force must withdraw from the ruined kingdom within a short time, otherwise they would easily be jointly annihilated by the ground anti-air defenses and the ruined kingdom's airship force. And whether heading northwest to the Intersea or north over the Amanda Mountains was too far, with too many variables. So their only option was to head east and rendezvous with the Sonia Sea fleet. This way, they might even be able to take the opportunity to air raid Pritz Harbor, and not return empty-handed. With the War Bishop's mental communication, the entire Faceac airship force did not experience any disturbance throughout the process. Even during the retreat, Faceac's formation remained neat and orderly. But it was precisely because of this unified command that the Fosac, accidentally, overlooked the only person who was not connected to the network. He quietly left the airship, came to the ground, without alarming anyone. Ins Zangwill did not look up at the airships in the sky, nor did he look at the rabbit that had become incredibly huge in the distance, but just buried his head and left in the opposite direction. But at this moment, Ins Zangwill's footsteps stopped, and a figure was simultaneously reflected in his eyes, which were either deep blue, almost black, or covered in blood vessels. It was a father wearing a simple white robe and a silver cross pendant. Ins Zangwill did not recognize him, but instinctively his hair stood on end, wanting to escape. But before he could make a move, the eyes of the simple father opposite him opened, and his light-colored pupils were already stained pure gold. Suddenly, black stone pillars rose up around him, supporting a magnificent and huge church. In this church, the surface of every pillar, every arch, every dome was inlaid with bones of different races. They were densely packed, watching Ins Zangwill with different eye sockets, surrounding a 100-meter-tall cross. In front of the cross, a blurry figure stood there, as if looking at everything with pity. This was a bone church that did not appear eerie at all, but was instead full of holiness. On the walls, windows, and doors of the church, transparent and distorted faces protruded, as if countless souls were sealed inside, making it impossible for Beander to feel the existence of the spirit world and the astral world anymore. The classical quill pen in Zangwill's hand automatically flew up and wrote rapidly on his black clerical robe. Although it is the suburbs, this is still within the scope of Backland, under the gaze of the night. Adam's blatant use of his power quickly attracted the attention of an angel of the Church of the Night, and stopping Adam completely conforms to the interests of the Church of the Night. As soon as the quill pen made that exclamation mark, endless darkness quickly surged from all directions, surrounding the entire church so tightly that not even water could leak through. A figure quickly emerged from the shadows. It was the leader of the ascetics, wearing a simple long robe, tied with a bark belt, and barefoot, the dean of the Black Knight Nunnery, the head of the 13 archbishops of the Church of the Night, Ariana. Ariana was already in Backland before the Fasak Empire's airship force arrived. And the reason why he had not shown up was simply due to the ancient alliance between the major powers. Angels do not participate in mortal wars. So he did not prevent the airship force from bombing. And Adam, as an angel, and an angel who did not belong to either side of the war. Ariana did not need to consider the ancient alliance, and had sufficient reason to attack him. As soon as Ariana appeared, dense darkness immediately invaded the interior of the church, forming a wall composed of deep darkness between Zangwill and Adam, completely separating the space where both sides were located. But Ariana was only a Sequence 2 angel after all, and trying to contend with an angel of Adam's level, who possessed uniqueness, was undoubtedly a bit difficult. For all three parties, they were well aware of this. Therefore, the quill pen continued to write on Zangwill's robe with almost no pause. Ariana certainly knew that she could not stop Adam from achieving his goal. This was a given, but his goal was never to stop Adam, but to buy time. As a discerner of the visionary pathway, Sequence 2, Demoness Karula had been keeping an eye on the whereabouts of the last Sequence 1 Deander characteristic. The commotion caused by Adam and Ariana undoubtedly attracted her to this place. Silently, a graceful lady in a black dress appeared inside the church. She looked at the people in the church with interest, suddenly let out a light laugh, and joined the melee. Although she was at odds with Night, their reasons for opposing Adam were the same. On the other side of the divided battlefield, fine cold sweat broke out on Zangwill's forehead, and his mood was extremely tense. The reason was simple: no matter what, he was only a Sequence 4 demigod. And any one of the angels brought by 008 could easily kill him. German Sparrow wanted to kill him, Auhomatova Einhorn wanted to obtain 008 and use its abilities to gain a greater advantage in the war. Ariana, as an angel of the Church of the Night, wished she could skin him alive as a traitor, and Adam and Karula both hoped to obtain 008, the last Sequence 1 Deander characteristic. Although they were temporarily restraining each other due to their respective conflicts. But once any one of them was free, it would be fatal for Zangwill. But even though Zangwill knew that 008 was playing with fire, he still had no thought of stopping 008 from acting. Because he knew very well that he could not exert the full power of 008, and letting it act freely was a better choice. And although 008 was constantly trying to kill him, its owner, it did not want to return to a sealed state, or be used as the main ingredient for a potion. In the current situation, their interests were actually aligned. The more angels 008 summoned, the more chaotic the situation would be, but they would also be safer. Crack. In the melee, the stained glass high up in the bone church silently shattered. Outside was deep darkness, but it made Zangwill see a glimmer of hope. Now is the time. Zangwill rushed towards the shattered stained glass without hesitation. He didn't know if this was an accident, or if an angel deliberately let him leave, but either way, this was his only chance. No matter what was outside, it was better than waiting to die in this bone church. 008 also stopped writing at this moment, automatically returning to Zangwill's hand. Only in escaping from the bone church, 008 would not hinder Zangwill. Bang! Zangwill slammed into the stained glass that was about to restore itself, shattering it, and then crashed heavily onto the ground. Zangwill did not stop for a moment, got up from the ground, and walked directly into the deep darkness. Although the surrounding darkness was dense, it was not impassable. To restrain Adam, Ariana had to concentrate, and thus was unable to control the darkness surrounding the church. Of course, although the power of this darkness had weakened, it was still hindering Zangwill from entering the spirit world. This meant that he had to pass through the darkness to use coincidence, and have some unknown existence in the spirit world take him away. And for Ince Zangwill, where he went was not important, what was important was that anywhere was safer than here. But just as he had passed through the darkness and a lush forest appeared before his eyes, another figure blocked his path. Ince Zangwill's pupils immediately contracted, and his body tensed. Because he recognized the other party, it was a Nighthawk of the Church of the Night, Ash Black. Chapter 344. I'll watch the show, you can do whatever you want. Ince Zangwill. Ember watched him quietly, his tone flat. I wasn't waiting for you here, but it doesn't matter, the result is the same. Ince Zangwill stopped, his eyes extremely wary. Although the man in front of him looked like an ordinary Nighthawk, Ince Zangwill didn't dare to be careless in the slightest, because he had dealt with the other party in Tingen, although it was a one-sided interaction where the other party hadn't discovered his existence. But Ash Black still managed to make fate deviate several times, which was enough to prove that the other party's status was extremely high. And now, the other party could appear here without the interference of 008, which meant that the other party was very likely also an angel. For Ince Zangwill, this was definitely not good news. An angel, and an angel closely related to the Church of the Night, could he have a good attitude towards him, a traitor to the Church of the Night? Ince Zangwill's expression was tense. He understood that if he wanted to escape, he had to reverse the desperate situation once again. And to deal with an angel, only an angel of the same level could do it. Ince Zangwill directly picked up 008, and quickly wrote on the clothes on his arm. Alhomatova Einhorn defeated the historical projection of Azik. He originally wanted to continue pursuing Gehrman Sparrow. But the movement not far away attracted his attention. He discovered Ince Zangwill on the periphery and, based on their good cooperative relationship, decided to help him. As the last stroke of the classical quill fell, Alhomatova Einhorn, wearing a Fursak commander's uniform, quietly appeared not far away. He discovered the two people who were in a stalemate, and his gaze focused on the quill in Ince Zangwill's hand. Ince Zangwill could die, but 008 must belong to the Fursak Empire. Alhomatova Einhorn immediately made a judgment and decided to help Ince Zangwill. Although the man opposite looked not simple, he didn't plan to get entangled with the other party. As long as he could delay for a while, it would be enough. The other party couldn't instantly kill him, could he? With this thought, Alhomatova Einhorn quietly approached and said indifferently to Ince Zangwill. Go. Okay. Ince Zangwill immediately breathed a sigh of relief, gripping 008 tightly. Alhomatova Einhorn's actions were full of the demeanor of a strong person, his expression calm and composed, clearly quite confident, which was also a blessing in disguise for Ince Zangwill. As long as Alhomatova Einhorn could block Ash Black, he would have a chance to create enough coincidences to escape from here. But before Ince Zangwill could put pen to paper, a dazzling golden sun suddenly lit up in front of his eyes. The sun, emitting light and heat, filled his vision, but the brilliant light was not dazzling. Instead, it gave people a warm and gentle feeling, like being naked in the cold winter and suddenly seeing the warmth of a fire. The next second, the dazzling sun quickly condensed into a spear. In the blink of an eye, Ince Zangwill's sight had already lost the position of the spear, but the golden light was still shining. Only the direction of the shining had changed slightly. Previously, it was in Ember's hand. And now, it was in Alhomatova Einhorn's chest. Alhomatova Einhorn stared blankly at his pierced chest. The sunlight spear still remained in his body, and the sacred light was tormenting his body at all times. Pain, incredibly intense pain, pain he had never felt since becoming an angel. He had never thought that he, who had already become an angel, would be so easily pierced through the heart, and even when he was on guard. But all the defensive measures he had set up had failed without exception, and he couldn't even delay for a moment. Alhomatova Einhorn's eyes looking at Ember had changed. He knew that was the emotion called fear. Since becoming an angel, not even gods could make him fear. Even the god of combat only made him feel awe. But now, fear almost instantly occupied his heart. That was the fear of death. Run. Only one thought remained in Alhomatova Einhorn's mind: he must run. Run away as quickly as possible. Only now did he realize how ridiculous his previous thought was. Such an existence was absolutely not comparable to a mere angel, not even a king of angels. That was power only a god could possess. Who gave him the courage before, making him think he could stop a god? Whatever happened to Ince Zangwill and 008, if he stayed any longer, he himself would be finished here. However, Ince Zangwill had the same thought. Above angel. When Ince Zangwill discovered that Alhomatova Einhorn was severely injured by a single blow, the fear in his heart had increased to an unimaginable degree, because he could deeply understand a principle: no matter what, an angel was an angel. A Sequence 1 angel might be able to crush a Sequence 2 in combat, but absolutely could not easily severely injure them, not even those of the same pathway. Therefore, Ins Zangwil understood that only the level above Sequence 1 could so easily severely injure an angel. Of course, if a true god were to act, they could easily obliterate an angel, unless it was the kind that was particularly good at saving their life. And judging from the current situation, the god opposite was not complete, or perhaps had some concerns. But no matter what, it was an undeniable fact that the other party could not fully exert their strength. In other words, he still had a chance. Fear did not crush Ins Zangwil. Instead, it made his desire to survive stronger. To live, he could pay any price. Thinking of this, he picked up 008 again and quickly wrote on his clothes. Alhomatova Einhorn is in a very bad state. The instinct to survive drives him to abandon Ins Zangwil and escape alone, but he knows very well that he cannot escape from the hands of a god, even if he abandons Ins Zangwil. So, he chooses to pray to his god. Facing the threat of war descending, Ash Black decides to deal with Alhomatova Einhorn first. Because Ins Zangwil is only a demigod, he is confident that even if left alone, he will not pose any threat. As an angel, Alhomatova Einhorn could actually easily detect and resist the influence of 008, including the angels in the Bone Church, who could also do this. But none of them did, because none of them thought this could pose any threat to them. And the situations created by these coincidences were in line with their interests, so they didn't mind going along with the plot of 008. And now, the future written by 008 was clearly harmful to Alhomatova Einhorn, but he had no choice. He knew Ins Zangwil wanted to use himself as bait, and he had to be that bait. Because he understood in his heart that he could not escape from Ember alone. He had to pray for the protection of the god of combat. Symbol of strength and glory, great god of nights, twilight of all things. I beg for your gaze, I beg for your protection. For demigods and angels, having the protection of a higher level existence or not makes a world of difference in their situation. For demigods and angels who have organizations and backing, they are often difficult to kill by existences of the same level, because they can always find opportunities to seek help from higher level existences. Demigods can ask angels for help, and angels can ask gods for help. Just like this. The bright sunlight of noon quickly dimmed, and the orange-red light instantly dyed half the sky red, obscuring the sun. The area around Backland instantly entered twilight. Alhomatova Einhorn bathed in the twilight. The surrounding trees quickly decayed, withered, and collapsed like powder under the great power of twilight. That was the power of twilight. Even the sunlight spear that was originally stuck in his chest, its brilliant light dimmed by a few points because of this. The power belonging to a god, at this moment, poured out without reservation. Now, Ins Zangwil seized the opportunity and quickly wrote the last line on his clothes. Ins Zangwil is in excellent condition today and can effectively control his mythical creature form, so he decides to hold nothing back and escape with all his might. As the last stroke fell, Ins Zangwil's body changed. His eyes instantly became deep black, as if stained with ink, and the fine lines around them gradually extended, forming strange and distorted mystical symbols. At his waist, on his ribs, his clothes swelled, flesh wriggled, and 4 skinless arms wrapped in blood vessels quickly grew out. These arms were quickly covered with white feathers, and a deathly silence rippled outwards. At the same time, Ins Zangwil's teeth elongated one by one, becoming sharp, their surfaces embedded with many blurred, tiny faces. In just the blink of an eye, this Nightwatcher was already leelying on the ground, becoming a strange monster with 8 legs and white feathers. This was the combination of the power of night and darkness. Boundless darkness stirred in the shadows, but under the suppression of twilight, the darkness brought by the mythical form did not reveal a single bit. But for Ins Zangwil, the current situation was extremely favorable to him. The twilight of a god was much stronger than the night of a demigod. Without any hesitation, Ins Zangwil quickly turned and fled. He was very confident about this. The twilight of war could help him block for a long time. Before Alhomatova died, he was safe. And during this process, the quill automatically floated up, and Ins Zangwil did not stop it. They were now in the same boat. If 008 really wanted to hold them back, none of them would be able to escape. The quill moved up and down, quickly writing on Ins Zangwil's body. An unknown existence was attracted by the battle and felt great sympathy for Ins Zangwil's plight. He decided to help him and take him away from the spirit world. The surrounding environment suddenly darkened, with a tangible gloom and chill, which even the twilight found difficult to completely suppress. An unknown creature was traversing the spirit world, quickly approaching this area. A demigod who caused a chaotic battle between multiple angels and gods was indeed worthy of attention and sympathy. Although theosympathy of such an existence might not be benevolent. Behind the eight-legged, white-feathered Ince Zangwill, who was rapidly running into the distance, a figure was outlined. This was a bloody mass of flesh with countless eyes growing on it, and arms of different races inserted into it one after another. It wanted to grab Ince Zangwill's body and drag him into the spirit world. Ince Zangwill was overjoyed and did not resist at all, allowing the other party to take him through the spirit world. But at this moment, a brilliant galaxy suddenly pierced through Ince Zangwill's vision. That was a brilliant galaxy, purple with black, containing infinite destruction and darkness, darkness like the abyss. The galaxy was so brilliant, yet it made Ince Zangwill glimpse boundless darkness. The darkness stole his mind, leaving only fear. Roar. Amidst the unknown existence's angry roars and screams, the galaxy swallowed him. Swallowed his arms, swallowed his eyes, swallowed that bloody mass of flesh, dissolving it little by little. Little by little, dragging it into the abyss of darkness. Whoosh. When the splendid galaxy dissipated, the bloody mass of flesh had long disappeared without a trace. Nothing was left there, that existence summoned by Ince Zangwill, that existence who was at least an angel. Just like that, silently, erased by a galaxy that came from who knows where. It was like dust wiped away by a rag, effortlessly and without leaving a trace. Fear kept Ince Zangwill rooted to the spot, even temporarily giving up thinking, unable to even use 008. Just like the expression on his face, his heart was left with only one emotion, fear, unable to hold anything more. Because he saw the galaxy, saw the truth within the galaxy, saw his future, the future of the world, falling into the abyss of darkness, complete destruction. At the end of Ince Zangwill's vision, a figure was slowly approaching him. That was Ember, or rather, a mimic terror in the form of Ember. Her name was Ashmi, Eternal King, Ashmi. For her, it didn't make much difference. Suddenly, Ashmi stopped and looked at the nearby bushes. She saw a figure walk out from beyond the bushes. He shrugged and said, "Relax, I just happened to be passing by and decided to be a spectator and watch the show. This won't disturb you, will it?" This figure was wearing a black trench coat like a robe, paired with black pants and black leather shoes. He had a wide forehead, a thin face, and wore a tall top hat and a very distinctive crystal monocle, looking extremely refined. He adjusted his monocle, revealing a sincere smile. As if he really was just here to watch the show. Chapter 345, Revenge of the Prince of Persia. Aemon raised his hands high, a faint smile on his face, and stood watching from afar, with no intention of getting closer. But even those who didn't know Amon's nature wouldn't believe that he came here just to watch a show. Whoosh. Just then, another figure appeared out of thin air. He wore a black double-breasted coat and a semi-tall silk top hat. His face had sharp features, revealing a clear sharpness amidst the coldness. It was Klein, who had transformed into Gehrman Sparrow. "It's getting livelier and livelier." Aemon chuckled softly, his eyes revealing a look of keen interest. Aemon. Klein also discovered Aemon, and his heart immediately tightened. With Ember present, he was not afraid of Aemon. Even if it was a one-on-one fight between him and Aemon, with the Beander abilities of Scholar of Yore and Miracle Invoker, he was confident that even if he couldn't defeat Aemon, escaping would not be a problem. What's more, the one who appeared here was definitely not Amon's main body, at most it was a Sequence 2 clone. If Klein was determined to confront Aemon head-on, he might not have no chance of keeping this clone of Aemon. But no matter what, Amon's appearance here was still a huge threat. "You don't have to mind me, I'm just here to watch the show." Aemon smiled and waved at Klein, while also taking a step back to show that he was just observing and not planning to intervene. Klein watched Aemon warily, not believing a single punctuation mark of everything Aemon said. Aemon is the god of pranks, and also the god of deception. Since he appeared here, it is definitely not just for pleasure, and even if he is truly just observing, his words will subtly leave traps. Even if others cannot see any flaws, Aemon will definitely bury traps in places that are difficult for ordinary people to detect. Since advancing to Sequence 2, Klein had a deeper understanding of angel and divinity. Even for Beyonders who advanced step by step from Sequence 9 to Sequence 2, divinity is still a fatal threat and must be resisted with the power of faith to find a balance in this resistance and maintain one's humanity. But for those born mythical creatures, their divinity is naturally far beyond that of ordinary Beyonders. It can even be said with certainty that Adam and Aemon, these two born mythical creatures, simply do not possess such a thing as humanity. They are pure divine creations, and this has never changed from beginning to end. Even though Adam has been possessed by his father, the ancient sun god, what remained of the ancient sun god was also only divinity. This might be because only divinity can adapt to Adam's body, while humanity would lead to loss of control. Therefore, when the ancient sun god first possessed the body, he had to abandon humanity and occupy this body with pure divinity. In contrast, Amon's situation would definitely not be much better than Adam's. Well, saying that might not be accurate. After all, for a pure mythical creature like Amon, only having divinity might not be a bad thing. For ordinary angels and even gods, they all need to maintain a balance in the confrontation between faith and divinity. The benefits are naturally obvious. This allows them to regain and maintain their humanity, so as not to be completely transformed into a stranger by divinity. There are also disadvantages, which is that while this confrontation stabilizes humanity, it will also inevitably weaken divinity. And divinity originates from Beander characteristics, so weakening divinity also means indirectly weakening one's own strength. In other words, as pure mythical creatures who don't need to deliberately suppress their divinity, Adam and Amon are stronger than other king of angels at the same level. Of course, there are pros and cons. While Adam and Amon can display much greater strength than other king of angels, they also bear more risks than other king of angels, the risk of the primordial one reviving in them. As born mythical creatures, they, who only have divinity and no humanity, are undoubtedly more suitable vessels than other beings, because they are naturally integrated with the will of the primordial one. The reason the ancient sun god separated these two children was to hope to strip away enough of the primordial one's will through this, to buy himself enough time. And this also means that Adam and Amon also need to suppress the primordial one within themselves, which will undoubtedly weaken their strength. However, the problem is that the pathways Adam and Amon follow are too special. In terms of confronting the primordial one, both have their own unique and effective special methods. Adam has his empty thoughts, and Amon has his clones. Empty thoughts are easy to understand. Even if Adam doesn't have any believers, he can empty thought enough anchors to suppress the revival of the primordial one. As for Amon, his clones are in a sense similar to marionettes. For Klein, he could actually form a marionette troupe, making each marionette a believer of the fool, and using his most real appearance as the image of the god, which can effectively provide the best anchor. There is no pollution of faith, and he can maintain his self-will, an anchor that suppresses the revival of the primordial one. Someone has already done this, namely Zeratul and half of the fool. The latter has been detached from reality for over 1,000 years, and the former for at least 100 years. During this period, even if they originally had faith, it no longer exists. The key to their ability to maintain their humanity has been because both sides have enough marionettes hanging on the ceiling, like dried human flesh, dense marionettes. The reason Klein hasn't done this is because he has just advanced to sequence 2 and hasn't had time yet. Similarly, the same applies to Amon. Each of Amon's clones is his anchor. They collectively vote to decide their image. This has nothing to do with humanity or divinity, it is simply because they want to be this image, so they maintain their current appearance. In other words, Amon's believers are himself. And this also means that Amon has actually been acting as Amon, acting as the god of pranks, the god of deception. This act itself is not a problem. Amon decides his own image and acts as himself, which is effective and has no obvious drawbacks. It is precisely because of this that Amon has been doing this for thousands of years. But at the same time, this also created a weakness that is not insignificant, that is, Amon must always maintain the image of the god of pranks and the god of deception. This means that every word Amon says is a deception, and every action is for the purpose of carrying out a prank. So Klein deeply understands one principle: do not believe Amon. Neither any action he takes nor any word he says is worth believing. Even if Amon really just planned to observe, he didn't need to show himself. Hiding in the dark to observe would be the best choice. Klein's eyes flickered slightly, and suddenly the corner of his mouth curled up. He reached into the void and grabbed. Isaac Eggers, with his bronze skin, medium build, black hair, brown eyes, and soft facial features, appeared before the group. But Klein did not stop, and grabbed into the void once more. His arms suddenly became heavy, and then he pulled back violently, dragging out a silver-white, scaleless tail. As Klein released his right hand, a giant snake suddenly appeared in midair. Its eyes were bright red and cold, and its body was covered with countless rotating wheels made of patterns and symbols, with slightly different details. Snake of Fate. The interest on Amon's face grew even stronger, and he exclaimed in wonder. You know quite a few angels. If it were Zeratul, he would probably only have those same old 3. Azuk's figure quickly expanded into a giant snake that blotted out the sky and sun. He was both illusory and real, composed of things that humans could not understand. His entire body was covered with large, dark green and black scales, and white feathers grew from the gaps between them. Each feather and each scale had strange symbols of different shapes. The feathered serpent and the snake of fate appeared together. The two giant snakes swam in the sky, and the shadows they cast were enough to completely cover the entire forest. Eamon raised an eyebrow, and his figure suddenly disappeared, reappearing in the distance. He directly left the area covered by the shadow. Eamon adjusted his monocle and sighed helplessly. You don't have to be so wary of me, do you? We shouldn't have any conflicts, right? Klein kept a straight face and didn't speak. No conflict. Excluding the true gods he actively provoked, Eamon was the only one who actively invaded Saphira Castle and almost succeeded. If this doesn't count as a conflict, then there is no conflict in this world. If Klein's most hated person was Ince Zangwill, who had killed him, and his target of revenge, then Eamon was the one who posed the greatest threat to Klein, his primary target of vigilance, and there was no other. Klein's precautions seemed a bit excessive, but in fact, they were not at all. Mimic Tyr could completely defend against Eamon, but no one could guarantee that others wouldn't come to stir up trouble later, which is why he summoned Mr. Azikinwil Osepton, the Snake of Fate. The only thing that surprised Klein was that Eamon didn't try to steal during his summoning. However, it didn't matter. Klein turned his gaze to Ince Zangwill, his expression incredibly cold. Although he had made many arrangements, only a few seconds had passed from the moment he appeared until now. And during this time, Ince Zangwill had been immersed in fear and unable to extricate himself. Even in the foreseeable future, he is destined to be unable to extricate himself. And Klein did not intend to let the tiger return to the mountain. To prevent unexpected changes, he had made sufficient preparations, unleashing all his trump cards. He didn't believe that he couldn't kill Ince Zangwill today. Finally, Klein flashed behind Ince Zangwill. Puff! A gloved hand pierced his chest and crushed his heart. Splash! Blood flowed down his fingertips like a waterfall, pooling into a small lake on the ground. Someone asked me to return this to you. A cold voice sounded from behind him, causing Ince Zangwill to turn his head with difficulty and look at the man who had crushed his heart with his hand. The pain in his body brought a hint of clarity to his fear-stricken state. But beyond the clarity, there was more fear, fear of reality, fear of death. Compared to the previous ethereal yet shocking fear, the current fear was even more difficult for Ince Zangwill to accept, because this time it was happening in reality, happening to him. He raised his hand with difficulty, seemingly wanting to resist. But before that, a strange pistol was pressed against his face. It was overall gray, a few sizes larger than a normal revolver, like half of a war hammer from classical warfare. The unusual thing about this pistol was that it had 6 barrels, each quite thick, with deep muzzles. Its cylinder was inlaid with a dozen ugly rivets, giving it a rugged aesthetic. With sounds of bang bang bang, Klein continuously pulled the trigger, firing silver demon hunting bullets, breaking Ince Zangwill's 14 limbs, breaking his 6 arms, 8 legs, breaking his wings, and also opening his forehead, making his roaring voice lower and lower, making him gradually lie down on the ground. This wasn't Klein deliberately torturing him, it was mainly Ince Zangwill's own doing. If he were in human form, he would have died by now. But he was in mythical creature form, and a nearly complete mythical creature form, possessing a life force that could be described as immense. This also meant that with Klein having to guard against Eamon and potential threats, and without using his Beander abilities, killing Ince Zangwill was not an easy task. But even so, Ince Zangwill was already on his last breath at this moment. Bang! Ince Zangwill's head completely exploded, like a dropped watermelon, with fragments and juice splashing everywhere. Klein didn't give the other party a chance to give his last words. He didn't want to know about Ince Zangwill's sad past. Clap, clap, clap. Sparse applause came from a distance. It was Eamon. He still stood outside the shadow, giving applause without hesitation, as if praising an outstanding performance. And just then, a figure suddenly appeared beside Klein, bending down to pick up the now dim quill pen. This figure was wearing a simple white robe, had a light golden beard covering the lower half of his face, and a silver cross pendant hanging on his chest, like the most ordinary father. It was the King of Angels, Adam. He had left the Church of Bones at some point, shaking off the obstruction of the 2 angels, and had arrived at the scene. In fact, judging from the timing of his appearance, he had probably been waiting in the dark for a long time. He gave up the opportunity to directly snatch 008, and instead let Klein take revenge with his own hands. In a sense, Klein had to thank him. So, bang! Klein raised his hand and fired without hesitation. Although he knew it was useless, he just wanted to discuss Adam. And at the same time, Ashmi, who had been waiting on the side, also suddenly attacked. The reason she hadn't done anything was that she was waiting for Adam. Chapter 346 Will I Hurt You? Because Ins Zangwil had 008, even though Adam knew this was likely a trap, he had to step into it. The premise for him to advance to Sequence 0 was to obtain all 3 Sequence 1 Deander characteristics and the uniqueness of that pathway. And now, 008 was the last missing piece in this step, so he absolutely could not give it up. If he couldn't obtain 008, then everything he had done would become a joke. The world war he had instigated would also completely lose its original meaning. Moreover, for Beyonders of other pathways, if their path was blocked, they still had a chance to take other adjacent pathways. But Adam couldn't. The Sequence 0 positions of the other 4 pathways adjacent to Visionary were already occupied, leaving no room for Adam to intervene. So he could only go all the way down this path, even if it meant falling. Klein raised his hand and pulled the trigger without hesitation. This couldn't stop Adam, but it could slow down his actions and buy time. However, what Klein didn't expect was that as soon as he raised his pistol, Eamon silently appeared in front of him. The face wearing a monocle and filled with a strange smile occupied Klein's entire field of vision. Just as Klein was about to react, he heard Eamon in front of him playfully utter a word. Surprise. Klein's pupils constricted slightly, losing focus for a moment. When he came back to his senses, he was no longer in the forest where Ins Zangwil was, but on a boundless wasteland filled with grayish-yellow fog. The ground of this wasteland was full of bottomless ravines, like a densely packed but incredibly chaotic chessboard, cutting the earth so that not a single piece was intact. The sky was dim, with only an occasional flash of lightning tearing through the heavens. This allowed Klein to see everything around him by the light of the lightning. Forsaken land of the gods. Klein's expression changed slightly. He had clearly taken full precautions, yet he was still unknowingly transported to the forsaken land of the gods. How did Eamon do it? Also, what was that word he just said? Klein cautiously observed the surroundings, but he didn't even find Amon's figure. Suddenly, his sight caught an extremely deep ravine. Unlike the other ravines, between flashes of lightning, he vaguely saw a thick, wide, grayish-white building faintly appearing at the bottom of the ravine. Klein just glanced at it, and his eyelids twitched slightly, recalling the scene he saw when divining Darkless Cross. If he remembered correctly, this should be the place where the ancient sun god, the creator of the City of Silver, the father of Eamon and Adam, walked out from. A figure wearing a pointed soft hat and a monocle, dressed in a classical black robe, appeared out of thin air beside Klein, standing side by side with him. He pushed up his monocle and said with a smile. Surprised. Only startled, not happy. Klein glanced at Eamon and quickly distanced himself. After all, he was just a Sequence 2 angel, still struggling a bit against Eamon, who was a king of angels. But if it was just about escaping, that was not a problem. Although the other party had used some unknown means to transport him to the forsaken land of the gods, this precisely indicated that he was not absolutely confident in capturing him. But it didn't matter, anyway, what was here was just a historical projection. Eamon looked at Klein's action of distancing himself and said with a slightly sad and helpless expression. You don't need to be so nervous, do you? Am I that scary? I brought you here just to have a good chat with you. Chat. Not even a dog would believe that. Klein's heart was calm, and he even felt like laughing a little. Eamon saw Klein's distrust and shook his head with some regret, saying. Really, just a chat. You can see that I'm just a clone and pose no threat to you. If it weren't for that, I would have run away long ago. Klein remained expressionless, not planning to say a word to him. Facing a king of angels of the Marauder pathway, every action and word he took could be exploited. Therefore, speak less, do less. Eamon put one hand in his pocket and said with a smile. You must be thinking about how you were transported here, right? It's actually very simple, well, for me. The Sequence 0 of the Marauder pathway has a very abstract name, error. This was named by my father. He once used a strange word, whose origin is unknown, to refer to it. Bug. Translated, this means the Trojan horse of fate, the bookworm of time, the loophole of rules, the embodiment of all errors. Klein remained expressionless. He knew all this information. While the word bug was a bit unexpected, it was within reason. After all, he had already confirmed that Amon's father, the ancient sun god, the creator of the City of Silver, was also a transmigrator from Earth, just like him. That's why Eamon knew bug, and could say the 2 standard English words a surprise. Seeing that Klein didn't respond, Eamon was not discouraged and continued to explain with a smile. Just like the meaning of the word, Bug, my ability is, error, I can utilize all the loopholes and errors that exist in this world to achieve my goals. For example, I can use the bug of the abyss to go anywhere I want. Klein remained unmoved, but couldn't help but feel a little wary in his heart. Although Amon's ability was strange, it didn't surprise him because he already had some understanding of it. The fact that he could use the bug of the abyss was not as shocking to him as the word bug itself. However, this did not mean that the other party could just casually transport him to the forsaken land of the gods. The other party could use the bug of the abyss, but only use the bug. The premise for him to use the abyss bug was the presence of the abyss. But Klein didn't think that the place he was just in happened to have a continuation of the abyss's power. If it did, he would have noticed immediately. And since there was no abyss in his location, how did Amon use the bug? With just a little thought, the answer was clear. Either Amon was lying, or someone else was helping Amon. An existence that could control the abyss to a certain extent was helping Amon secretly cause trouble, which meant Amon was not in a hurry to speak, still watching Klein with a smile, seemingly deliberately giving him time to think. This meant that there was another king of angels or even a true god secretly helping Amon. Klein's heart immediately sank. If that was the case, his current situation would likely be very dangerous. No, that's not right. If that were the case, Amon wouldn't need to explain so much to him. With two kings of angels working together, and under the circumstances of a sneak attack, he could have been subdued immediately, but Amon didn't even send his main body, he just had a clone here, chatting with him. The other party made no secret of his intention to stall for time, and Klein didn't intend to expose it. Amon definitely had a conspiracy, but that didn't mean he didn't have a backup plan. That's why he pretended to obediently listen to Amon talking to himself. But even now, the other party still hadn't taken any action. Why was that? At this moment, Amon, wearing the pointed soft hat and monocle, walked to the edge of the ravine, with his back to the grayish-white sprawling building, and said with a smile, slightly spreading his hands. This is the sacred place where my father awakened, burying the history I seek to explore. My father told me that this place has a very ancient name, called. Illuminated by the silvery white lightning tearing through the sky, Amon, dressed in a classical black robe, paused for a moment, spread his arms a little wider, and said with a hint of solemnity. Chernobyl. Chernobyl. Hearing Amon's words, Klein's first reaction was bewilderment. When he was transported here, he had envisioned many possibilities, but he never expected to hear such a name. It was like a water-cooled machine gun appearing in an ancient oil painting, or a novel plot appearing in a scientific research paper, full of incongruity and unbelievable. The next second, Klein thought of the absurd incident where the ancient sun god created the dark angel Sosriel from his own rib, but named his eldest son Adam. He instinctively believed that his current experience was a similar situation, perhaps this was just the ancient sun god's twisted sense of humor. This was his first thought, and he didn't feel there was anything wrong with this guess. But at this moment, another silvery white lightning bolt tore through the sky, illuminating the deep ravine and allowing Klein to see the thick, continuous grayish-white building at the bottom again. This was a building style completely different from the current era, the fourth epoch, the third epoch, and even the second epoch. Thump. Klein's heart rapidly constricted for a moment, then expanded. His pupils quickly dilated, and his expression almost froze on his face. Thump. Thump. Klein heard his own heartbeat, and one after another common knowledge about the current world suddenly popped up in his mind. A year has 12 months, 365 days, with leap years. Every day has 24 hours, every hour has 60 minutes, every minute has 60 seconds. Confirmed to be a planet. There is only one sun and one moon in the sky. Thump. 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 In just 2 or 3 seconds, thunder seemed to continuously explode in Klein's mind, causing his lips to tremble slightly, as if he was desperately trying to suppress the formation of a certain answer. But the moon in this world is crimson, and the cosmos is a bit different from Earth. I'm not an astronomy enthusiast, so I don't remember clearly, but the Emperor consumed the potion of the savant pathway. If the cosmos were exactly the same, he would have discovered it long ago. Opposing opinions then appeared in Klein's mind. They were like sturdy anchors, preventing the ship in the storm from being blown away from the harbor. But the next second, Klein remembered 2 sentences. One was a terrifying prophecy he had seen online in his previous life. When the stars return to their places, chaos shall rise from the ground, and the great the first shall awaken. The other sentence was, beware of the moon. That prophecy wasn't made up. The stars returned to their places, so it became different from before. Klein almost ignored Amon in front of him, and even his body trembled slightly. He used a lot of strength to let out a sigh in his heart. Perhaps, I have never left my hometown, but I can never go home again. As soon as he had this realization and understanding, the grayish-white fog silently appeared before his eyes. He could feel that his connection with Saphira Castle was becoming increasingly close. This was originally a good thing, but Klein's expression changed, and he immediately suppressed his connection with Saphira Castle. He was almost certain that everything Eamon had done before was for this, to take the opportunity to invade Saphira Castle, or even steal Saphira Castle, when his connection with it became increasingly close. Klein, who was already an angel, couldn't fall for this trick, so he immediately cut off the connection and quickly guarded against possible attacks. However, none of that came. The surroundings were calm, and Eamon still stood at the edge of the ravine, watching him with a smile. He did nothing, even though such a good opportunity was right in front of him, he did nothing. It was as if he and Klein were old friends who hadn't seen each other for a long time, and everything they had just done was simply to catch up after a long time. It seemed reasonable, but Klein didn't believe it. Klein had already come to an understanding in his heart and slowly said, "Your main body is not in the forsaken land of the gods." Eamon smiled and asked in return, "How do you know? From the beginning, it has only been a clone talking to me. I originally thought your main body was hidden in the dark, ready to ambush at any time. But if your main body was really in the forsaken land of the gods, you would have attacked me just now." Klein stared closely at Eamon and said in a deep voice, "But you didn't, which means your main body is still in Backland. Your target isn't me, and it can't be Ember, you can't beat him. And for you, besides Saphira Castle, the most important thing is the remaining Sequence 1 Beander characteristic. Your main body staying in Backland is to scheme for that Sequence 1 Beander characteristic. The purpose of moving me to the forsaken land of the gods is just to prevent me from disrupting your plan." Clap clap clap. Eamon applauded and praised. "A very brilliant speculation, and it's basically the truth." Eamon adjusted his monocle and said with a half smile, "The only mistake is, you seem to think that me moving you to the forsaken land of the gods is harming you. Otherwise," Klein retorted, "Adam would use all his trump cards to get 008. And Ember, who posed the greatest threat to him, would definitely be Adam's key target for defense. So Ember was now entangled with the god of combat, and the one controlling the abyss was likely also a true god. That party might also make a move. Under these circumstances, Adam obtaining 008 was almost a certainty. And Eamon, as a king of angels who also possessed two Sequence 1 Beander characteristics and a uniqueness, could also use this opportunity to find Pale's Zoroaster and hunt for the last Sequence 1 Beander characteristic. Only then would Eamon have a chance to ascend to the throne of Sequence 0. Chapter 347 Surprise. Underground of St. Samuel Cathedral, North District, Backland. Leonard, who had just finished a case discussion meeting with members of the Punishers, Machinery Hivemind, and Military Intelligence 9, returned to his office and sat down. Although he didn't know why the Fasak Empire's airship fleet suddenly changed direction, it was a real relief for them. At least it meant that Backland would not continue to be bombed, and the casualties and chaos would not continue to expand. Just then, Pale's Zoroaster's slightly aged voice echoed in his mind. "They have found the exact location of the Jacob family treasure." Ah! Leonard was stunned for a moment, unable to react. But soon he remembered that not long ago, he had some interaction with Ash Black and Don Tangte. That was at a dinner party hosted by a congressman, which he and Mobert Zoroaster attended in search of promotion. Their purpose was the same, which was to find and hunt down that demigod of the Marauder pathway. Leonard wasn't familiar with either of them. Although he strongly suspected that Don Tangte was Klein Moretti, he had no evidence. On the other hand, Mobert Zoroaster obviously knew both of them and had a close relationship. And in the end, that demigod was successfully hunted by Ash Black. He thought the matter was over, but the other party took the initiative to contact Mobet. The Sequence 4 Beander characteristic could not be given to him, but the other party gave Mobet a piece of information. That was, the demigod who was hunted was a descendant of the Jacob family. During the Fourth Epoch, the Tudor dynasty had 5 great angel families, namely Abraham, Ammon, Antigonus, Tamara, and Jacob family, and the ancestor of the Jacob family was also an angel of the Marauder pathway. Before the Fifth Epoch, Ammon, this king of angels, only had one Sequence 1 Beander characteristic and the uniqueness. The other 2 Sequence 1 Beander characteristics were on Pale's Zoroaster and the progenitor of the Jacob family. But at the end of the Fourth Epoch, Ammon began hunting these 2 angels. The ancestor of the Jacob family disappeared without a trace, and it is highly likely that he has been successfully hunted by Ammon, while Pales was also severely injured as a result, and had to wander and parasitize to avoid Ammon's pursuit. The demise of their ancestors undoubtedly caused severe damage to these two great angel families, even worse than the Abraham family. Although the Abraham family found it difficult to produce mid to high sequence Beyonders, at least they had a complete inheritance. But the Zoroaster family and the Jacob family almost completely disappeared. And from the memory of that demigod, it could be known that the other party was the last descendant of her branch of the Jacob family. And the reason she came to Backland was to find a treasure of the Jacob family. That was a treasure left by an angel of the Jacob family. If the other party could find the treasure, there would be hope of advancing to sequence 3 or even higher levels. And for Pale's Zoroaster, if he could get the Beyonder characteristic in that treasure, he could also recover part of his strength. Therefore, he was also determined to get this treasure. But the old man was obviously very cautious. He did not personally explore, and also prevented Leonard and Mobit from exploring. Instead, he had Leonard sell this information to the Hermit of Fate, letting the people of the Hermit of Fate be cannon fodder and explore that treasure. Leonard finally reacted, but for some reason felt that something was wrong, and frowned, asking, "Why did they suddenly act? Is there a trap?" Pale's Zoroaster chuckled. "Although the location of that treasure is hidden, if you explore it rashly, it is easy to be discovered by official Beyonders, and then you will lose both people and money. And now, the war launched by Faceac has made the official Beyonders busy and they have no time to pay attention to them. This is undoubtedly an excellent opportunity, so they will naturally choose this time to explore that treasure. As for traps, how could a treasure left by a Marauder Angel not have traps? But have you forgotten that I am also a Marauder Pathway Angel?" Leonard was relieved to hear the old man's explanation, and then asked somewhat sheepishly. Then, Pales guessed what he wanted to say, and scoffed. "Don't worry, besides that Beyonder characteristic, I also got you a sealed artifact." "That's good." Leonard breathed a sigh of relief. Although the Church of the Night also had many sealed artifacts. But those things were not something that could be used casually, and even borrowing them had strict time limits. And for Leonard, who was eager to improve his strength, possessing a 1-level sealed artifact of his own was crucial. And this treasure was an excellent opportunity. "You'd better leave here first." Pale's Zoroaster's aged voice sounded again. "The Church of the Night is likely to send an angel to Backland. It will take some time for me to digest that Beyonder characteristic, and it may cause some commotion." "Okay." Leonard frowned. He still felt a little strange, but he nodded and agreed. He stood up quietly, rubbed his forehead, left St. Samuel Cathedral, and returned to 7 Pin Street. Just as he passed through the porch, he suddenly saw someone sitting on the sofa. The person was wearing a classical black robe and a pointed soft hat, with his right foot resting on his left leg, leisurely reading a newspaper. As if sensing Leonard's entry, the person raised his head, adjusted the monocle on his right eye, and revealed a playful smile. "Amen. The blasphemer Amen." At this moment, Leonard's thoughts were almost completely frozen, his mind was blank, and only a few thoughts could turn. Just at this time, Amon's lips moved, and he uttered the ravings that completely belonged to the divine level. In Leonard's mind, one voice after another instantly echoed, as if from countless Amons. "Surprised. Unexpected. After realizing that I couldn't get Saphira Castle in a short time, I shifted my focus to you. Ah, right, Pales, I forgot to tell you, for a long time in the late 4th epoch, the ancestor of the Jacob family was me in disguise. I secretly swallowed him a long time ago, and then watched his descendants panic and try to add a secret treasure to the place where Tudor became the Blood Emperor. I didn't deal with these guys because I had a premonition that this treasure would be very useful. I have a clone that has been sleeping there for over 1,000 years, patiently waiting for someone to open the treasure. To truly determine your whereabouts, I watched those guys destroy the trap, take the items, watched your clone steal the characteristics and sealed artifact from them, watched him carefully swallow and digest, and now, patience has finally paid off. Ah, by the way, I forgot to ask you, don't you think all this is a coincidence?" Coincidence? A thought subconsciously popped up in Leonard's mind. 008. He just said there was something wrong, because all this was too coincidental. The war just broke out, the Hermit of Fate just took this opportunity to explore that treasure, it just happened to be discovered by Pales, it just happened that an angel descended on Backland, Pales was worried about being discovered, so he asked him to go home first. And most importantly, the occurrence of these events was quite reasonable, the outbreak of the war made the official Beyonders overwhelmed, so the Hermit of Fate would go to explore that treasure. This development was almost a matter of course. It was also because of the outbreak of the war that the Angel of the Church of the Night would descend, which was to prevent the Faceac angels from jumping the gun. In other words, the surface of these coincidences was almost all inevitable, so it was difficult for people to detect the coincidence in them. The stinging pain wriggling all over his body pulled Leonard back to reality. His spiritual body was contaminated by Amon's divine ravings, and the tearing of his soul caused uncontrollable mutations in his body. His head visibly swelled and contracted, causing tufts of black short hair to grow on his face, and flesh to wriggle and protrude between his ribs and waist, as if new limbs were forming. Just a few ravings, and Leonard was close to losing control, in extreme pain, and completely unable to resist. This was the Son of the Creator, this was the King of Angels. And at the same time, 7 Pin Street changed. Pitch black stone pillars stood up at some point, supporting a majestic and magnificent church. Every pillar, every arch, every dome of this church was inlaid with the white bones of different races, densely packed and chaotic, staring at the slightly small Leonard in the center of the hall with empty eyes, as if judging. Aemon stood in front of the 100-meter-high cross deep in the church, smiling and looking at Leonard, who was bent over with a distorted expression, and said, "This bone church is not bad, right? I just stole it not long ago, anyway, he doesn't need it now. This way, if they want to find an anomaly here and descend, it will be delayed by at least 30 seconds, which is enough." He originally intended to steal Saphira Castle. After all, the level of Saphira Castle was far above the Sequence 1 Deander characteristic in uniqueness. But unfortunately, Aemon knew very well that it was almost impossible to steal Saphira Castle from a Sequence 2 Miracle Invoker. Perhaps in the eyes of outsiders, the Deander abilities of a Marauder Pathway Angel were incredibly bizarre, capable of parasitism, cloning, and stealing fate. But for Aemon, the Seer Pathway Angels were one of his detested enemies. It wasn't because the Seer Pathway Angels were strong, but because they could run very well. Their main body could hide in the historical void at any time, and could also move in a large number of historical voids. As long as the history they knew was sufficiently hidden, even gods could do nothing to them. And even if they were lucky enough to be pulled out of the historical void, they still had one last move. Suicide. As long as they committed suicide, the Deander characteristic contained in their destroyed body could unknowingly enter the historical void and combine with the projection's off-spirit body threads from the past, giving them substance, and then drilling out of the historical fog and reorganizing their bodies in the real world to resurrect. And this was the so-called resurrection from death. This kind of miracle was essentially a deep utilization of the power of the past. But just like the Black Emperor's resurrection, this kind of resurrection from death could not be stopped even by gods. In other words, even if Aemon was lucky enough to force Klein to a dead end, the other party could escape by committing suicide. Stepping back 10,000 steps, even if Aemon really stole Saphira Castle from Klein, he couldn't enter Saphira Castle. After all, Saphira Castle was already contaminated by flames, and if he dared to go in, the only possibility was to be burned to ashes. So Aemon decisively gave up on Saphira Castle and instead set his sights on the last Sequence 1 Deander characteristic. Only by first obtaining that last Sequence 1 Deander characteristic and becoming a Sequence 0 true god, would he be qualified to compete for the ownership of Saphira Castle. For this, Aemon decisively made a choice. He never intended to do anything to Klein from beginning to end, just using a clone to stall for time with the other party. And during this time, his main body had quietly sneaked into Backland, looking for Pale's Zoroaster. And just as he thought, Pales knew nothing about this. He even naively thought that he could use this opportunity to recover his strength. Sigh. Klein sighed softly, silently praying for his poet classmate in his heart. Since Aemon wasn't here with him, he must have gone to find Pales. In that case, the poet classmate, as Pales' parasitic object, was definitely in a very dangerous situation. After so long, Aemon might have already succeeded. The only thing Klein could do was to transmit the message to Ember through Saphira Castle, hoping that Ember would arrive in time to stop all this. Even if he couldn't stop it, saving Leonard would be good. As for himself, Klein walked to Amon's side, stood on the edge of the deep ravine, and looked at the gray-white building below, silent. Aemon stood still, smiling and asking, "Before you turn me into a puppet, can I say one last word?" Klein said casually, "You can speak freely." While Aemon was stalling for time, Klein was naturally not idle either. He had already controlled all of the other party's spiritual body threads. This clone in front of him was already his quasi-puppet and could not pose any threat to him. Amon's fingers moved slightly, as if he wanted to raise his hand to adjust his monocle. But his body was already Klein's puppet and could not make any movements, so he had to show a somewhat helpless expression and said, "The Deander characteristics of Zeratul and Antigonus are in your hands. Your current state is similar to mine, both lacking the last Sequence 1 Deander characteristic. What if I told you that this last Sequence 1 Deander characteristic is in the Forsaken Land of the Gods?" Klein's expression remained unchanged, and he calmly looked at Eamon, with an expression of, "You continue, I'm listening. At the same time you came to this world, Kotar obtained a curtain. That curtain contains the last sequence 1 Beander characteristic of the full pathway." "Oh, right, Kotar is a Ouroboros, and also the only Ouroboros left in this world." Amon's lips curled up slightly. "After so long, you have already grown into a sequence 2 angel. Then guess if he has completed the ritual to advance to Attendant of Mysteries." Chapter 348 World. Forsaken Land of the Gods, Chernobyl. The curtain. Klein murmured softly, a vague guess forming in his heart. Eamon is the god of pranks and also the god of deception, but this does not mean that every word he says is a lie. Just like a proverb, Klein once heard. The highest realm of lies is when every word you say is true, but combined together, they form a massive lie. Just like that famous example. In the history of the 19 World Cups spanning 84 years, only 3 countries have defeated the Chinese national team: Brazil, Turkey, and Costa Rica. No football powerhouse has ever managed to draw with the Chinese team. Even a world-class team like Brazil has only defeated the Chinese team once. Furthermore, the Chinese team has never lost a penalty shootout in the World Cup, and no team has ever defeated China twice in the World Cup. Moreover, the number of goals conceded by the Chinese team in the World Cup is far less than Brazil and Italy, which are known for their defense. Powerhouses like Spain, Germany, Italy, and France have not qualified to play against the Chinese team on the World Cup stage for 84 years. And the Chinese team still maintains an undefeated record in the knockout stage of the World Cup finals. As the saying goes, we only lost in the group stage. Eamon is the same. His goal must be to deceive Klein, but he wouldn't use pure lies to fool him. As the god of deception, Eamon must understand that if every word he said were a lie, no one would believe him, and his deception would naturally cease to exist. Therefore, he would definitely provide genuinely shocking and attractive intelligence to lure the other party, thereby hiding the true purpose of his deception. This is the case now. Whether it's the nearby Chernobyl or the curtain in the Ouroboros' hand, both hold an unimaginable attraction for Klein. Klein had to admit that Amon's deception was successful. He hoped to explore Chernobyl while Eamon was away, and also hoped to obtain that curtain as soon as possible. The Ouroboros is also called the god of wishes, a standard angel, subordinate deity, and miracle invoker. From the fact that he could survive for thousands of years in the forsaken land of the gods, right under the noses of Time Angel, Eamon and the true creator, it's clear that his escape ability is absolutely second to none. And once Ouroboros Kotar advances to sequence 1 Attendant of Mysteries, he will definitely be harder to deal with than Zeratul. And just as Eamon said, his current state is similar to Amon's and Adam's. They all possess 2 sequence 1 Beander characteristics and the uniqueness of their respective pathways, lacking only the final sequence 1 Beander characteristic. And now, both Adam and Eamon are on the verge of success, while Klein has only just obtained a few clues about the final sequence 1 Beander characteristic. If this process had a progress bar, Klein's progress bar would already be significantly behind Adam's and Amon's. Furthermore, once Eamon and Adam become sequence 0 true gods, they will definitely find ways to use Kotar to their advantage. Eamon has worked hard for thousands of years to find the final sequence 1 Beander characteristic. And Eamon himself is the typical kind of person who, because he's been rained on, wants to tear up others' umbrellas. So once he becomes a true god, in order to contend for Saphira Castle, he will definitely try everything to prevent Klein from becoming sequence 0 and prevent Klein from obtaining the final sequence 1 Beander characteristic from the Ouroboros. That is to say, whether Klein wants to or not, he only has one path to take now, and that is to hunt this Ouroboros before Eamon becomes a god and before Kotar becomes an Attendant of Mysteries. And in this way, Klein will inevitably stay in the forsaken land of the gods to search for traces of the Ouroboros. But how easy is it to find such an Ouroboros that has been able to survive for thousands of years right under the noses of Eamon and the true creator? The only thing that can comfort Klein is that he and the Ouroboros are both on the Fool pathway and possess Saphira Castle, and their Beander characteristics have a strong tendency to converge, which will have a certain effect on fate and judgment. So as long as he stays in the forsaken land of the gods, he will definitely meet the Ouroboros. But the problem is, Eamon is a king of angels on a similar pathway, and the Beander characteristic convergence law also exists between him and the Ouroboros, with an effect not much worse than his. However, under these circumstances, Eamon still failed to capture the Ouroboros. This is definitely not because Eamon is incompetent, but only indicates that the latter is extremely cunning. However, this is also related to the Ouroboros and Eamon having spent time together for a long time. Over these thousands of years, the two sides must have played many cat and mouse games. Ouroboros Kotar is extremely familiar with Eamon, to the point where, as soon as you stick your butt out, I know what you're going to fart. So Klein's only advantage at this stage is that the Ouroboros doesn't know him. The Ouroboros will be wary of Eamon and the true creator, but will not be wary of Klein, this unknown variable. That is to say, if Klein wants to hunt the Ouroboros, he has only one chance. However, the appearance of that curtain is also very peculiar. According to Amon's statement, the curtain appeared at the same time he arrived in this world. That is to say, that curtain is likely a companion item given to him by Saphira Castle. Perhaps from the beginning, the purpose of Saphira Castle, or rather, the celestial worthy, was to let Klein achieve his goal in one go and directly become a Sequence 1 attendant of mysteries. This is similar to the ancient sun god back then, who was already a true god of two pathways when he emerged from Chernobyl. But due to the interference of a certain existence or existences, this curtain, which was originally Klein's companion item, appeared in the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Although it seems that the other party has deprived Klein of the possibility of becoming Sequence 1, Klein actually feels fortunate. Because the biggest difference between him and the ancient sun god is that he knows nothing. If he had truly been born as a natural mythical creature like Eamon, already a Sequence 1 angel as soon as he appeared in this world, the individual named Zhou Mingrui would inevitably have been crushed at the very beginning. Because at that time, he would definitely not have been able to control this power that didn't belong to him and would have been taken over by the celestial worthy the moment he was born. Only by progressing step by step from Sequence 9 to Sequence 2 like this can Klein maintain his humanity. But before that, a myriad of thoughts flashed through Klein's mind in an instant, but he quickly turned his gaze to reality, focusing on the deep ravine in front of him. Searching for the Ouroboros is necessary, but Chernobyl also cannot be left unexplored. After all, he's already here. Thud. Asterisk. The point of light triggered by miracle illuminated everything around like a small sun. Klein's feet, clad in laceless leather shoes, landed steadily on the ground at the bottom of the deep ravine. The endless darkness around seemed to hide one monster after another. In front of him was Chernobyl, built layer by layer from gray-white. Under the combined effect of the high-altitude lightning and the light of miracle, Klein quickly discovered something. This thick and vast gray-white building had no door. Outskirts of backland. In a forest, a father wearing a simple white robe and a light golden beard held a silver cross pendant on his chest with one hand and said in a gentle voice, "This struggle is meaningless." Karula, wearing a black gauze dress, said with a smile. "Meaningless? I think it's very meaningful." Adam continued with clear eyes. "When I become a visionary, I can give you the 2 extra Sequence 1 Beander characteristics. Compared to other pathways, the visionary has a very special characteristic. A normal Sequence 0 is composed of a uniqueness plus 3 Sequence 1 Beander characteristics. Lacking any of these, one cannot be called a true god, only a king of angels. However, the visionary can separate 2 Sequence 1 Beander characteristics after becoming Sequence 0 and replace them with corresponding characteristics, envisioned. The things envisioned were real enough to function perfectly within the framework of uniqueness, plus 1 Sequence 1 Beander characteristic, ensuring the visionary's status does not decrease and power does not diminish. And the 2 separated real Sequence 1 Beander characteristics can be combined with one of one's identities or a being envisioned, allowing them to become authors, act freely, and transform into the main body through certain means or mediums when necessary. But even so, Adam's willingness to give all 2 extra Sequence 1 Beander characteristics to Karula is already a huge concession, because keeping these 2 Sequence 1 Beander characteristics means Adam can create 2 avatars and have 2 chances to revive. But if the Beander characteristics are given to Karula, it means he will completely abandon the ability to revive, which is crucial for a visionary. The concession made is not small. Karula let out a chuckle and retorted, "How about we switch? You give me all 3 Beander characteristics and the uniqueness, and when I become a visionary, I'll give you 2 Sequence 1 Beander characteristics." Adam's expression remained calm, undisturbed by Karula's provocation. Only he, who possesses divinity, will not be overly affected by humanity and exhibit excessive emotions. This is exactly where he is stronger than reality. To describe it in terms of the outer deity, period before the first epoch, he is now the perfect embodiment of absolute rationality. Adam replied with a gentle expression, "It's fine if you don't agree. Regardless of the outcome, I will give you the Beander characteristics. And now, without the help of the servant of concealment, you should know that you cannot stop me." Indeed, Karula nodded in agreement. Even if she cooperated with Ariana, she could only barely hold on. The king of angels of the visionary pathway is strange enough that few kings of angels of the same level are his match, let alone Karula and Ariana, who are only sequence 2. If she still had a king's soul in her hand, she might be able to try, but now. Karula's lips curved slightly as she chuckled softly. I really can't stop you, but delaying time is not a problem. For this moment, Adam had indeed calculated everything. He mobilized all available power. Even true gods were affected, and the god of combat did not hesitate to personally intervene to help him achieve his goal. The true gods who did not show up were also wary of each other, with undercurrents surging, thus achieving this fragile balance. They were all quietly observing the situation, wanting to be the fisherman while not wanting others to be the fisherman. But even so, all Adam could do was delay time. Because no matter how much he did, it couldn't change the fact that he himself was not a true god. Even reality, the other half of Adam, was bound by the agreement with Ember and would not personally intervene to help him, merely observing in secret, even though he also hoped Adam would succeed. Because only when Adam becomes a sequence 0 true god will they have the hope of becoming omniscient and omnipotent, again after fusion. But reality would not make a move. He wouldn't even show up, nor would he let either Medici or Ouroboros show up. Therefore, Karula actually didn't need to win against Adam, nor did she expect to obtain the sequence 1 Deander characteristic from him. She only needed to delay time until either Ember or Ashmi became free. Adam saw Karula's persistence, gazed at the sky, and slowly said, "It seems you still don't understand that everything happening now is just one part of the story. Compared to angels of other pathways, there is a world of difference in strength between authors and discerners." As he spoke, he slowly raised the quill pen in his hand and began writing in the air. In the midday sky, the scarlet moon suddenly became prominent, its color turning extremely rich and expanding exaggeratedly, as if hanging over the roof of every house. Outside the world, on the moon orbiting the earth, flowed a sea of crimson. It submerged everything, as if embracing and digesting this huge natural satellite. And in the farther cosmos, the brown star, orange star, crimson star, golden star, blue star, etc., all shone brightly at the same time, emitting light of different textures. This seemed to be another typical case of an ignorant child escaping the mother's protection and coming to the dangerous void. But this time, the departure was not that of an ignorant weakling. Bang! Asterisk. The magnificent Milky Way collided with the Soul Torrent. The turbulent aftershocks caused the void spanning unknown tens of thousands of miles to collapse. Thousands of stars tried hard to emit their respective lights, but in front of the magnificent and brilliant Milky Way, they still seemed dwarfed. That Milky Way, which seemed capable of piercing through galaxies, and the Soul Torrent, capable of washing away the rules of the world, erupted with their brilliance at this moment. That was the war between the Eternal King and the First Fire. They both possessed the great power to reshape heaven and earth. Both were closely connected to fire, yet completely opposite. The Red Moon closely monitored the changes on the battlefield. Outside the world barrier, which was covered in cracks, the terrifying faces that were difficult to describe with normal words simultaneously showed signs of movement. They quietly moved away a little. And on the back of the Red Moon, there seemed to be a phantom of a bright, azure full moon. Within that phantom, a petite girl quietly watched everything. Chapter 349 Greedy Blue Moon. The Forsaken Land of the Gods. Klein silently passed through the gray concrete barrier and entered the interior of Chernobyl. Walking through the buildings covered in black marks, Klein felt a bit strange about the remaining items and overall layout inside the buildings, because compared to the nuclear power plant in his previous life's impression, this place was more like a research institute. Without needing to search specifically, he quickly found a room where a robot had collapsed, and several yellowed papers were placed on a table. Using the translator he retrieved from the cracks of history, Klein understood the content on them and learned what had happened here. The Russians had built a research institute here to study how to make dried-up oil fields produce oil again. Unexpectedly, an accident soon occurred. Most of the people in the research institute were turned into oil by an unknown contamination, and the survivors could hear shouts coming from underground. These simple and direct passages made Klein fall into deep thought. The contamination from underground, that is, the contamination from the root. Most of the people in the research institute were contaminated and turned into oil, but the ancient sun god survived. He withstood the contamination, or rather, the contamination chose him as a carrier. That's why he was able to survive and appear in the second epic as the ancient sun god, a true god with two pathways. But this also led to the contamination he endured being far more severe than that of other true gods, ultimately leading to the ancient sun god's fall. Does this mean that the source of the underground contamination is in this research institute? Klein exited the room and continued deeper into the research institute. After walking for dozens of seconds, his vision suddenly darkened considerably, and a cliff appeared ahead. That part of the research institute had collapsed into the ground. The darkness was deep, profound, and void, with no end in sight. Vaguely, Klein seemed to hear silent shouts, coming from deep underground, directly resonating in his mind. Just then, a shriveled hand, reduced to just skin and bone, reached out from the darkness that light couldn't illuminate, grabbing onto the edge of the cliff. Then, a figure leapt out and landed before Klein. He wore a pointed soft hat, a classical black robe, and a monocle in his right eye socket. It was none other than Time Angel Amon. But this Amon's state wasn't quite normal. He looked like a skeleton covered in a thin membrane of skin. Klein's eyes were vigilant, and he quickly invaded the other party's spiritual body threads. At the same time, the flesh and blood of the Amon before him quickly filled out. He pushed up his monocle and said with a smile, "There's actually a visitor. Who are you?" Amon raised his hand and adjusted the crystal monocle on his right eye. This movement froze for several seconds after completion before ending. Amon murmured as if thinking, "There are no other, me, nearby. Is it truly none, or has the connection been completely severed? What accident caused this Amon to become independent? No, perhaps it's a deception." Klein's heart stirred first, then he suppressed the corresponding thoughts and instead asked, "You are exploring the secrets underground." Amon nodded gently. "Isn't that obvious?" He immediately turned halfway around, pointing to the darkness ahead of the cliff that the light couldn't illuminate. "My father climbed out from here, just like I did just now." "Ah yes, it has a name you should have heard of, the Chaos Sea." "The Chaos Sea. The Chaos Sea, one of the 9 Sephira." Klein asked calmly. "So you risked jumping in, searching for buried history and the truth of the world." "Roughly so." Amon pinched the upper and lower edges of his monocle, saying with a slightly self-mocking tone, "But I wasn't willing. Me, knows that deep underground is dangerous and doesn't want to go down personally. We tried many roundabout methods, including making puppets to replace ourselves, but none succeeded. We couldn't get feedback. Ultimately, under the main body's guidance, we conducted a fair vote. Unfortunately, I was chosen." Klein asked, "Then, you jumped down yourself? Can't just wait for them to throw me down, can I?" That Amon spread his hands and said. Speaking of this, he seemed to finally understand something, murmuring to himself. "Did the Chaos Sea sever my connection with the main body and the surrounding avatars? I'm independent." Amon's voice suddenly paused, and he said with a slightly helpless expression. "You and my main body must have a significant conflict, but do you need to be so wary of an avatar like me?" "Yes." Klein, who had already controlled Amon's spiritual body threads, nodded solemnly but quickly smiled again. "Moreover, you should actually thank me." "Thank you." Amon's expression became strange. "You want to turn me into a puppet, and I should thank you? Between us, who is the god of pranks?" "Yes, you should thank me." The corner of Klein's mouth slightly curled up. He reached out and gently grabbed in the void, holding a soul ember flickering with starlight in his palm, and said playfully, "Thank me for giving you true independence." Klein threw the soul ember towards Amon, simultaneously controlling the half-puppeted Amon to catch the soul ember. Then, he forcefully crushed it. "Wait." Amon's expression changed slightly, and he urgently wanted to speak to stop it, but controlled by his body, he was powerless to resist. Crack! The soul ember was easily crushed, turning into ashes that wrapped around Amon's body. Until it completely immersed into Amon's body, until Amon's surface was covered with a layer of mottled, sparkling starlight. This made him look like charcoal that hadn't finished burning, continuously burning himself in the residual heat. Klein watched all of this and smiled happily. Perhaps just as the other party said, he was indeed disconnected from the main body due to the Chaos Sea, but the possibility is small. After all, Amon has been in the forsaken land of the gods for at least 1300 years. His exploration of Chernobyl did not just start recently, but has been ongoing throughout these 1300 years. Even with the most conservative guess, this avatar was deployed by Amon at least hundreds of years ago. Even if we take a step back and assume this avatar is truly disconnected from Amon's main body, Amon couldn't possibly be unaware. And since Amon is aware, he would definitely eliminate the independent avatar immediately and deploy other avatars to explore the Chaos Sea more cautiously. So the answer is quite obvious. Everything this avatar just said was just a deception. Because for Amon, the greatest significance of this avatar is to confirm whether Klein has entered Chernobyl. As long as Klein enters Chernobyl, regardless of the fate of this avatar, it's not a bad thing for Amon. If the avatar is eliminated, it can at least confirm that Klein did indeed enter Chernobyl. And if the avatar is not eliminated and Klein is successfully deceived into believing he is independent of the main body, then Eamon might even use this avatar to carefully prepare a trap for Klein. But Klein chose neither. He chose to flip the table. Since you say you are independent, I will give you true independence. Klein silently released control of Amon's spiritual body threads and chuckled. We can have a good chat now. Eamon fell into a brief silence. He raised his hand, looked at the sparks burning in his palm, and sighed softly. He didn't tell me this would happen. Klein asked without revealing his thoughts. He, are you referring to Adam? Adam is the ancient sun god's divine manifestation, and having also come from the old city, he is clearly no stranger to Soul Ember. But he doesn't seem to tell Eamon everything. Of course, it's also possible that Adam himself doesn't know. After all, the one who collaborated with Adam also wouldn't tell him everything. Eamon asked with some surprise. Why would you think it's Adam? Eamon didn't expect Klein to answer and continued talking to himself. Of course I'm talking about my father. He once mentioned Ember, they interacted in the second epic. But I don't know much about him either. That's why I stayed in the forsaken land of the gods, searching for buried history and the truth of the world. Klein's eyes flickered. Eamon doesn't know that Adam is the ancient sun god. That's right. Adam and Amon's alliance made him assume that Eamon already knew the truth. But the fact is, Adam would never tell anyone about this. Having experienced betrayal once, Adam would definitely be very cautious and would inevitably conceal the fact that he is the divine side of the ancient sun god. Besides his other self, he would not tell this secret to anyone, even if Eamon is his son. After all, Adam is also the son of the ancient sun god. Wasn't he still possessed by the ancient sun god? Medici, as the true creator's most loyal subordinate, was also tricked to death by Adam. This made Medici hate Adam to the bone, but the reason was simply that Adam didn't want to arouse suspicion because of it. How could he, like this, expose this matter to others? The world now is not friendly to the ancient sun god at all. Although the seven gods are hostile to each other and balance each other out, their attitude towards the true creator is surprisingly consistent. Even the true creator is sealed in the forsaken land of the gods. If Adam dared to reveal that he is the divine side of the ancient sun god, he would definitely be attacked by the seven gods. Even if he could luckily escape with his Beander abilities, he wouldn't even have a door to advance to sequence 0. Because the seven gods would do everything possible to prevent this from happening. Wait, Klein's expression shifted. He suddenly remembered something. There's no reason Ember wouldn't think of the things he could think of. If that's the case, why didn't Ember directly expose this matter to the Evernight goddess, or even to other true gods? Klein doesn't think Ember didn't do this for a superficial reason like, not wanting to use others' hands. After all, judging from Ember's style of action, as long as it can make things easier to handle, he wouldn't mind diverting trouble to others at all. Is there a possibility that Ember actually acquiesced to Adam becoming sequence 0? And if we follow this line of thought, what good would acquiescing to Adam becoming sequence 0 do for Ember? On the surface, there is none, but it would be of great benefit to the true creator. Because once Adam becomes a god, he will definitely merge with the true creator first. After becoming a true god with two pathways, and with the help of the Chaos Sea's power, he could easily reclaim the authority that was once stolen. So, is Ember planning to personally cultivate an ultimate boss and then hunt it down himself? No, it wouldn't be like that either. Ember's goal is clear. Hunting powerful enemies is only challenging, but it doesn't have any substantial benefit for the current Ember. Therefore, the greatest possibility is the same as what Ember did to Saphira Castle. Ember hopes Adam becomes a true god, hopes he merges with the true creator. Then, he will replicate his operation on Saphira Castle, starting from the merged entity of Adam and the true creator, step by step encroaching on the Chaos Sea, and making the Chaos Sea into his shape. Klein's thoughts stirred slightly, and he immediately sorted out his thinking, but soon new questions arose. Allowing Adam to become a god aligns with Ember's interests, but Ember definitely wouldn't want Adam to be dominant after the fusion. The fusion of Adam and the true creator is essentially the two parts of them, which were divided, rejoining into one. One is dominated by divinity, the other by humanity. If Adam's divinity is dominant, then the true creator's humanity might only leave a tiny trace. This state can be called ding-dang. And Ember is inevitably inclined towards the latter, which is for the true creator to be dominant, with only a tiny trace of Adam's divinity remaining. Therefore, the true creator times Adam entity, which is dominated by the true creator after fusion, can also be called ding-gen. With Ember's support, the true creator theoretically has an advantage. But Adam also has the support of another, first fire. In this regard, the two sides are actually evenly matched. So how can Ember ensure that what emerges after the fusion is Ding Zhen, and not Ding Dang? Klein silently raised his head and cast his gaze towards Eamon. Perhaps, it's similar to what he did to Eamon. Just then, Klein's expression suddenly shifted, because he vaguely heard illusory prayers in the spiritual world. The voice was so familiar, and as an angel, Klein could easily see the appearance of the praying person. It was clearly the poet classmate. And the fact that the poet classmate is praying to him now, does it mean that Amon's main body has succeeded? Klein's expression changed. He glanced at Amon's avatar and chuckled. Your main body has succeeded, and might return soon. I advise you to leave as quickly as possible. While speaking, Klein's figure quickly disappeared, leaving only Eamon behind. And Eamon also changed slightly in expression, looking uncertain. But ultimately, he succumbed to reality and also disappeared from the spot. When he, as an avatar, truly gained independence, he already knew his fate, because the main body's only plan for him was to destroy him on the spot. Backland, inside the luxurious Hall family villa, Audrey stared blankly at the red moon that appeared in the sky, murmuring softly. A red moon, why is it appearing during the day? Could it be the goddess? The goddess's honorific name includes Crimson Lord, and the scarlet moon is a symbol of her power. Twilight, appearing at noon corresponds to the god of combat in Fursak. And the red moon now hanging high in the sky, does it represent the Evernight goddess? Audrey instinctively felt something strange. The goddess's honorific name does include Crimson Lord, and the Church of the Night does hold grand masses during the full moon, but the Church of the Night has never encouraged believers to worship the moon. And in the mysterious world, there is also the primordial moon, an evil god who stole the authority of the moon. If it were truly the goddess making a move, shouldn't the anomaly appearing now be night? But if that red moon is not the goddess's doing, then who could it be? Just as she was thinking, Audrey's vision suddenly blurred, and then she couldn't help but widen her eyes. The scene that appeared before her made her mouth drop open, because in the sky, a second moon appeared. A pure and cold, deep in blue illusory full moon. She hung there beside the red moon, fully releasing her light. All the onlookers were stunned. This was a moon they had never seen before. Neither normal textbooks in human society nor books related to mysticism had recorded such a phenomenon. Aside from the usual crescent moon, full moon, and occasional blood moon, the moon had never shown such changes. At least since the fifth epoch, in these 1300 years, it definitely hadn't. At this moment, the onlookers realized that besides crimson and blood-red states, the moon had other colors, but the question was, why were there two moons? Chapter 350 Don't look up, don't look up. What in the world is that? Audrey couldn't help but murmur in a low voice. Although she had become a demigod, there were still too many things in this world that she couldn't understand. She only knew that the Faysak Empire had suddenly attacked Backland and declared war on the Ruined Kingdom. With the help of an unknown angel, the Faysak Empire's airship fleet abandoned its bombing mission and turned away from Backland. Up to this point, everything that had happened was still within Audrey's comprehension. But everything that happened next completely exceeded her imagination. The sudden appearance of an orange-red twilight at noon meant that the god of combat, whom the Faysak Empire worshipped, had personally taken action. Although she didn't know if his action was to deal with the angel who led the airship fleet away, a god personally entering the fray was enough to shock those who knew some of the inside story. The sudden appearance of the red moon in the sky was also incredibly astonishing. Although people were already accustomed to the red moon, seeing it almost every night, this was the first time they had seen a red moon appear during the day. Even for those demigods who had lived for hundreds of years, this was definitely the only time in their lives they had seen a red moon in broad daylight. And the subsequent appearance of the blue moon completely shattered people's understanding of the world. The grand spectacle of two moons shining together would probably make even angels feel incredible. At least, there was no record of similar events in existing historical documents. No, perhaps there is. Audrey suddenly remembered the history of the sanguine that Mr. the Moon had recounted at the Tarot Club. In the second epoch, there had been a phenomenon of two moons shining together, but that time was also very different from now. The two moons that appeared that time were both red moons, while this time the colors were red and blue, two completely different colors. What did this mean? Or rather, what did this represent? Since the twilight was a manifestation of the god of combat's authority, were those two full moons also incarnations of a god's authority? But the problem was, besides the Evernight goddess whose honorific name included Crimson Lord, there should be no similar descriptions among the other orthodox gods. Could it really be the primordial moon? But even if one moon was the manifestation of the primordial moon's authority, what about the other blue moon? Audrey's heart was filled with confusion and fear. She was confused by the current situation and afraid of the unknown. Because she had a premonition that the 2 full moons in the sky might bring unimaginable disaster to this world. And if that was truly the case, would other gods step in to save the world? Audrey's vision suddenly went dark. It was truly dark. Boundless, deep darkness silently descended, covering the sky and plunging the entire world into a lightless night in an instant. Whether it was the sun, the twilight, or the 2 full moons hanging high in the sky, they all disappeared from sight under the cover of the night. It's the goddess. Audrey felt a bit of pleasant surprise in her heart. Night was the manifestation of the goddess's authority. Even though she already knew the secret of Sequence 0, her attitude towards gods remained respectful, and her faith in the goddess had not changed. But at the same time as the pleasant surprise, and boundless fear surged in Audrey's heart, the goddess's action dispelled her unease. But didn't this also indirectly confirm her guess? Those 2 full moons truly possessed the power to destroy the world. Miss Furs had suffered greatly from the red moon, being afflicted by curses every full moon and red moon. This was a curse originating from the Abraham family bloodline, forcing them to struggle for survival in endless pain. If they couldn't bear it, they would lose control and turn into monsters. So, would those 2 full moons cause similar consequences? If the goddess hadn't taken action, would it mean that everyone who looked directly at the 2 full moons would suffer the same curse, and everyone would mutate into monsters? Audrey's small face turned slightly pale, scared by her own speculation. If the circumstances allowed, she really wanted to ask, what in the world is happening to this world? Just as Audrey had this thought, the world before her eyes changed again. In the deep darkness, sparse lights soon lit up throughout Backland. But these lights were not bright enough. They were just like fireflies in the night, emitting faint glows that were completely unable to illuminate the entire city. But above the sky obscured by the night, the brilliant Milky Way bloomed like a flower bud just opening, dyeing the deep darkness with a touch of purple, a dazzling galaxy that stretched across the sky and traversed the Milky Way. Like a rift spanning the cosmos, the Milky Way was so brilliant and beautiful, yet also so terrifying. When people's eyes came into contact with the brilliant Milky Way, boundless fear had already sprouted in their hearts. It was as if a deep abyss was hidden within that dazzling galaxy, enough to evoke the deepest fears in people's hearts. Even Audrey, who had already become a spectator pathway demigod, her inner fear still uncontrollably grew. Even though she was a psychiatrist, fear made her forget how to use her Beyonder abilities, forgetting how to dispel this fear. When she finally managed to overcome her fear and looked at her family and servants beside her, their condition was even worse than her own. Fortunately, at this moment, a sacred and ethereal voice sounded in their ears. Cross your hands, place them on your chest, offer that silent prayer, and cry out with your heart. The only refuge is peace. Audrey lowered her head, closed her eyes, raised her hands, crossed them on her chest, and then silently repeated. The only refuge is peace. The only refuge is peace. Again and again, until the entire city became extremely quiet. In the dim and peaceful atmosphere, what greeted them was a chanting composed of one sacred and ethereal voice after another. The crimson full moon rises, reflecting on the earth. Everyone falls into a sweet dream, dreaming of themselves. Dreaming of parents, wives, and children, this is forever. As the sacred and rhythmic voices echoed in layers, this chanting came from the night church in the city, as if multiple choirs were praising the goddess. The believers of the night couldn't help but become peaceful, seemingly forgetting the troubles of life and no longer worrying about the various problems of the real world. Soldiers, citizens, and officers fell asleep one after another, behind fortifications, inside houses, and by the streets. They dreamed of a peaceful darkness, dreaming of moonflowers and night-scented grass, their bodies and minds extremely serene, no longer eroded by fear. Inside the luxurious Hall family villa, Audrey opened her eyes. She looked at her family and servants who had fallen into peaceful sleep behind her, and murmured in a low voice. Is that the goddess's divine kingdom? That peaceful darkness, filled with plants like moonflowers and night-scented grass, was boundless, but the darkness did not cause fear. Instead, it made one feel immense peace, as if being in that pure land meant no longer having to worry about any threats or having any worries. In the mystical world, moonflowers symbolize the Crimson Lord, and night-scented grass symbolizes night. That peaceful darkness filled with moonflowers and night-scented grass was undoubtedly the divine kingdom of night. That was the goddess's protection for her believers. Audrey believed that such things must be happening all over the world, and the believers of night would all be protected. So, what about other places? Audrey seemed to understand something. Gods needed believers, needed the faith of believers as anchors to stabilize their own state. The goddess would step in to save her believers, and the other orthodox gods would obviously be no exception. Fursak had the protection of the god of combat, Intis had the protection of the eternal blazing sun, and Fenbut also had the protection of the Earth Mother. Under the great power of the gods, the influence of fear would be minimized. But this still inevitably aroused curiosity. What exactly was that brilliant Milky Way hanging high in the sky, which even demigods feared and forced even gods to take action to save their believers? Audrey was very curious, but her instinct told her, don't look up. Don't look up. Just a slight glance up, and boundless fear had already sprouted in her heart. Who knew what would happen if she looked again? Maybe she would explode on the spot, or even completely lose control. In the mystical world, a Beyander's curiosity about the unknown is unavoidable, but one must learn to restrain it. Only by maintaining curiosity can one not lose the desire to explore. But only by restraining curiosity can one live longer. Audrey took a deep breath, pulled the curtains shut, and blocked her view. The only thing she needed to do now was to protect her family who were in peaceful sleep. Inside a luxurious villa in Backland's West End, a lady wearing an Intis-style white ladies shirt, with chestnut long hair naturally draped down, sat quietly at the table on the balcony, her gaze fixed on the almost tangible cold full moon in the sky. She was not unfamiliar with those two full moons. One was the red moon she saw almost every night in her life of over 100 years. As for the other cold and bright blue moon, Bernadette looked across. On the flat surface at the edge of the table, a petite doll sat on a custom-made small chair, holding a custom-made small cup, elegantly sipping black tea. Bernadette's azure eyes, like a condensed sea, swept across, and she softly asked, "Do we not need to intervene?" That clear and bright azure full moon was clearly the incarnation of the one in front of her. The other party had already taken action, but Bernadette didn't know who his opponent was or what exactly he was going to do. And the reason she asked this was actually just a small test. For a god, this kind of test was undoubtedly disrespectful, but Bernadette knew that he did not reject this kind of clever test. Bernadette even had a misconception: he seemed to enjoy this way of interacting. And the reason she called it a misconception was because Bernadette would not try to guess the intentions of a god. No need. The petite doll placed the teacup on the custom-made small table, her tone as indifferent as ever. "You can't do anything." Bernadette silently refilled the petite doll's cup with tea. She was already a Sequence 2 angel. Even in a battle between Sequence 1 or even King of Angels, she had the right to intervene. Although she was destined not to be a match for a King of Angels, a brief confrontation was not a problem. But Rani said she had no right to intervene. This meant that it was a real god war. A god war between whom and whom? Night and the god of combat. The deep conflict between the Fasak Empire and the Ruined Kingdom, and the mutual hostility between the Evernight goddess and the god of combat, were not secrets. Now that the Fasak Empire had launched a sneak attack on the Ruined Kingdom, it was not impossible for a god war to break out between the gods of the two sides. And the twilight that appeared in Backland not long ago also carried obvious hostility. But the current night was clearly not directed at the god of combat, but at certain existences in the cosmos. Those powerful existences were entrenched outside the world, mostly coveting the power carried by this world, constantly thinking of invading the world. And up to now, many existences had already infiltrated their influence into the world, whether it was the bound god controlled by the mother tree of desire, or the petite doll in front of her, they were all outer gods incarnations. So, was Night fighting against those outer gods? No, if Night was fighting against outer gods, it wouldn't just be this scene. A god war would definitely be more terrifying than anyone could imagine. And the power displayed by Night at the moment, rather than fighting against outer gods, was more for isolating the aftermath of the battle happening in the cosmos. And the protagonists of the god war were outside the cosmos: the red moon, the blue moon, the galaxy, and countless terrifying existences. Just the aftermath is enough to destroy the world. A deep sense of powerlessness suddenly surged in Bernadette's heart. Before becoming an angel, she had once naively thought that everything would go smoothly. She even thought she had a chance to use him. But when she truly became an angel, when she learned a little about outer gods, outer deity, and cosmos from various sources, the sense of powerlessness in her heart grew day by day. In the eyes of the world, angels were already the strongest existences below gods. And the most powerful among them, the king of angels, were even beyond the reach of gods. But what could that do? In front of outer gods, everything was illusory. Even gods were just struggling desperately in front of them, seeking a glimmer of hope. Just as he said, she couldn't do anything. She couldn't even save her father. Bernadette fell completely silent, her eyes filled with frustration, her emotions extremely low. The petite doll took a sip of black tea and withdrew her gaze from Bernadette. Although she was already an angel, she was still inevitably affected by looking directly at the galaxy. The terror contained within Comet Azdalar was not constant, but was increasing day by day. The origin Azdalar glimpsed was darkness, and that deep abyss not only took away his mind, but also made him feel fear. But the fear of darkness was not constant. The more you understand, the more you will fear the unknown abyss. The stronger a person is, the more fear and unease they will feel. These fears grow day by day, and one day they will crush everyone who gazes into the abyss. The petite doll's gaze penetrated the darkness and saw the galaxy spanning the sky. She said softly, "Ashmi, it's been a long time." The corners of her mouth curved slightly as she murmured to herself. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.